Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. For some ungodly reason, you still have the boredom to watch this show. Welcome to the 11th episode of the World So Far Report. As always, alongside with me is my colleague Victor Krajnik.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wasalaikum assalam. Hopefully this time around that camera won't suck balls, and especially its memory card won't suck balls, and we'll be able to properly edit an episode, unlike last time. It was getting a little bit funny because usually the first 10 episodes are where you go with experimentation, and nothing had gone wrong for 9 episodes in a row, and that would have been quite dubious. And of course the 10th one was a charm. If you want to curse at us or send us news, or God forbid to praise us, topics at freedomalternative.com. We're also on BitChute. Don't forget to subscribe on our profile on BitChute as well, just in case big tech decides to suck balls with us. Yes, give crypto so we can maintain that profile as well, because at least on BitChute we are the customer rather than the product. And yes, of course, this show exists solely because you support it, so please give shekelim, because otherwise the show itself can get quarantined for no reason related to big tech, but simply for the reason that we don't have enough shekels to drink during the show. Because speaking for 4 hours in a row can be quite tiresome. Alrighty, of course, the Americas. Daily Wire. DOJ targets Elon Musk's SpaceX for allegedly preferring to hire US citizens. The US Department of Justice is investigating Elon Musk's SpaceX for allegedly preferring to hire American citizens over non-citizens. According to the DOJ, in March 2020, a non-US citizen inquiring about the position of technology strategy associate at SpaceX was asked about his citizenship status. DOJ attorney Lisa Sandoval stated that SpaceX ultimately failed to hire him for the position because he is not a US citizen or lawful permanent resident. So he wasn't a non-citizen, he was an illegal immigrant. Last Thursday, the DOJ filed a request with a judge to order SpaceX to comply with an administrative subpoena for documents related to how the company hires, CNBC reported. The DOJ wants SpaceX to comply with its subpoena within 2 weeks. The disgruntled applicant initially filed a complaint of employee discrimination with the DOJ's Immigrant and Employee Rights Section on May the 29th, 2020. The IER, enforces the anti-discrimination provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which has an anti-discrimination provision prohibiting citizenship status and national origin discrimination in hiring, firing, or recruitment or referral for a fee. On December the 1st, 2020, the OCHO, denied SpaceX's petition to modify or revoke and ordered SpaceX to comply with the subpoena. On December the 11th, 2020, SpaceX said it had received the order but notified that it did not intend to produce any additional information in response to the administrative subpoena. Based and red-pilled Musk? I think Mr. Musk should, on his own, file a class action lawsuit against the DOJ for perpetual harassment against an African American. I'm just saying.
but hold on a second, Elon Musk isn't black. How could he be African?
Well, he's as African American as he can possibly be. He's born in Africa and living in the United States and having been given citizenship into his adulthood. Therefore, he's an African American by a constitutional African American, as a matter of fact. And besides, who knows what he identifies as? Have you asked Elon Musk how he identifies? What do you mean he's not black? How do you know that? You don't. You bigot.
Well, on the contrary, since a lot of people know about the apartheid and they're making the connection that he's from South Africa, he's white, so he must definitely have something to do with that. But as we can see, the US from this point of view starts to resemble China, because you know what other person was considered to be low tier African. It was that guy, Serpensa, Winston Sturzill, who made those cute videos about visiting China and speaking about everything. He was considered exactly the same way as the really black people coming from Africa while he was in China, just because he had a South African passport.
Yep. Anyway, it's not a new thing in the US. Whenever a Democrat administration shows up, the DOJ kind of sucks balls in this
from this aspect.
In this kind of fashion. They almost never actually do anything, but they just produce this kind of paperwork, so their reports to the Politburo, the Democrat Party leadership, looks good, and say, oh look, we opened whatever many billions of investigations of discrimination, and they don't usually do anything. I suspect Tesla or SpaceX is big enough so they can basically eventually tell the DOJ to fuck off, which they will. But until then, they're gonna keep on doing this. What can I say? Congratulations, DOJ, for free advertising for SpaceX. It's seriously, some of these bureaucrats, they simply don't understand just how much of a positive news is for Americans of any race or ethnicity or creed or whatever, to hear that there is a company that actually, yes, prioritizes legal residents and US citizens over illegals. Because again, this guy, the unnamed applicant, wasn't just a non-citizen, he was an illegal immigrant. So, I'm just saying.
Yeah, but even like that, the consensus regarding US companies working in the US, what it's about employing people from overseas, except big tech and companies that base themselves off just hiring H-1B people. The general bias is towards hiring US citizens, or at the very least hiring people from the NAFTA area, for example.
Canadians and Mexicans.
For example, Canadians and Mexicans. Yeah, my cousin works at a US company with that NAFTA exemption, that he doesn't have to go through that ridiculous compliance process, as for example, if we would have gotten employed in a US company.
Yeah, well, probably both of us would have gotten an alien of exceptional ability visa, so,
Oh, that, yeah.
So that gets things, what do you call them, streamlined. It makes things easier, for sure. Alrighty, let's go to Degeneracy Central. San Francisco Gate. 699 people died of drug overdoses in San Francisco last year, compared to 235 from COVID-19. San Francisco saw nearly 3 times as many people die from drug overdoses than from the coronavirus last year. A staggering data point that highlights the city's dire drug epidemic, fueled by the powerful painkiller fentanyl. A record 699 people died of overdoses from January through December in 2020, according to a new report from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. This number may seem surprising amid the global COVID-19 pandemic, when San Francisco has shuttered schools and businesses to prevent deaths. In San Francisco, 235 people passed away from complications of the coronavirus in 2020. The city's drug crisis is deepening because fentanyl, which can be 5 to 100 times more potent than morphine, flooded the city's drug supply, the newspaper said. Moreover, the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted city services like housing and treatment, and left many people who rely on others to help save them if they overdose to use alone. Kristen Marshall is the project manager from the Drug Overdose Prevention and Education Project, yes, the DOPE project, a city-funded program that coordinates San Francisco's response to overdose. Marshall said fentanyl use amplified drug overdoses in recent years. In 2019, 441 people died of drug overdoses, a 70% increase from 2018. Now the pandemic has pushed overdoses to a record high. The one golden rule of overuse prevention is to try not to use alone, and the shelter-in-place order said to keep yourself safe, so you need to isolate, she said. That's just the opposite. People at high risk went into isolation and then heightened the risk. The chaos put people at higher risk. The worst months were in the dead of the summer, when it was most chaotic for this community. The DOPE project has also seen an increase in the number of overdoses prevented by Narcan, a medication commonly sprayed up the nose to reverse an opioid overdose. This year, the project recorded 3,470 reversals compared to 2,610 last year. Marshall noted that their numbers capture only an estimated of 20 to 30% of overdoses prevented by Narcan. Too bad I forgot the noses at the other location. Definitely. This would have definitely been appropriate for a honk moment. Honk with Q. San Francisco. Is it? How much is it? 7 months since we were first called conspiracy theorists, when we said that the measures allegedly meant to curb COVID-19 are in and of themselves worse than the virus itself. Well,
and to what extent, resorting straight to fentanyl.
And again, this I mean, at the end of the day, you can say, well, these are just junkies, so who cares? And in a way, I kind of have to agree, at least in part. But still, these are junkies that are, 25 to 35, which I will argue that are slightly more significant to the community than whether grandma lives up to 89 years and 7 months instead of 89 years and 5 months. Because that's basically what the so-called lockdowns have achieved, basically. They have prolonged the lives of individuals who would have died anyway, because, people in their 80s and 90s, they kind of tend to die. Life being a deadly sexually transmitted disease. On the other hand, how much dope do these people put into themselves in San Francisco if these are the death numbers? I mean, really, 400 and something last year. Okay, this year with the pandemic, whatever, okay, fair enough. But last year, 400 and something, still more than the so-called deadly pandemic.
Yeah, and this is just covering the situation with fentanyl. Well, as you remember, California has been for a few years now junkie central, more than Colorado could ever be.
Yes,
surprisingly,
and more than
this is the only drug that's been reported. So who knows what other strange things people are overdosing on and they're not reported. And no, it's not just weed.
Well, it's kind of hard to die of weed overdose. It's possible, yes. But it's very rare. More often than not, you die because of complications of overdose. That is to say, you're not paying attention where you're walking and get hit by a bus and things of that nature. But then again, with COVID-19, we've had it here in the podcast. Someone fell off a ladder and was counted as a COVID-19.
Oh yeah, that guy from Croatia.
Croatia, yes. So I guess you can die from weed overdose. I mean, far from me to defend weed, but I'm just saying it's less lethal than fentanyl for sure. But seriously, why? If you care about this topic, I don't, but I know that there are many conservatives who do care about the so-called opioid epidemic, which is a kind of a misnomer. If you want to call it an epidemic, it's an epidemic of individual terrible choices rather than something that you can't control. But anyway, if you care about this topic, expect a lot worse, especially in liberal cities. Although in the so-called red states where the governors have sucked balls, I'm thinking here about places like Wisconsin, also. So places that have treated COVID-19 as worse than the plague, because again, during the Black Plague there was less sanitary fascism than in some places of the world, and I'm thinking here about decent places, not China, but even as many decent places have treated this in an exaggerated fashion, making it the worst public health fuck up in human history. And maybe
pretty much not even during the Justinian plague, when there was an interest, because it wasn't just the plague itself, but there was also the famine that occurred after. Not even then they went that full retard as the entire planet went just because of this cough.
The Justinian plague was yes, it can be in the top 10 biggest fuck-ups, public health fuck-ups in human history, but it's not in top 5. Whereas COVID-19 is probably the biggest, due to the scale in particular. Close enough, it would be H1N1 11 and 12 years ago. That one was also treated hysterically, but being a cough that was transmitted at a much lower R0, it didn't catch to the imagination of all sorts of bureaucrats who suddenly found themselves having power, which is why you have to flatten them in court. See the previous video on this channel. But seriously, expect a lot more of this. It's gonna get a lot worse before it gets better, because it's junkies, man. I mean, junkies aren't particularly reasonable when everyone else is mostly reasonable. Now, when everyone else is even more unreasonable than the junkies, and again, with these kinds of things, nobody's gonna pay for it, because it's just junkies. It's very hard to find political support for it, in Democrat cities, mentioning that it might be the fault of the local politicians, that would get the conversation, what do you call it, terminated pretty soon. I'm just saying. Alrighty. Okay, this is my favorite topic. Bloomberg, meme stocks lose $167 billion as Reddit crowd preaches defiance. Philippe Zarv wanted to be part of history, so after watching GameStop Corp's eye-popping 1,625% run in January, he joined in on the action. The 18-year-old student from Guanacaste, Costa Rica, snapped up $927 worth of GameStop shares Monday using his father's investment account, when the stock was trading around 232, he said. A day later, he has already hit the sell button, almost half of his original investment gone. It was a social experiment. It most certainly was not a smart investment. It was a gamble. He is just one of a horde of traders who loaded up on left for dead stocks in the past few weeks, egged on by members of Reddit's Wall Street Bets forum. And for a time it all worked. Their enthusiasm drove up prices and volatility so much that Robinhood Markets and other brokerages were forced to clamp down on trading. No, they were not forced to. They were intimidated into, or they were just being idiots. Anyway, the 50 stocks that Robinhood originally put on its restricted list had added $276 billion in value from the end of 2020 to the height of the recent mania, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. But now $167 billion has been wiped out in just a matter of days, and there's little sign of the pain is easing. Still, calls abounded for day traders and Redditors alike to hold on to their positions. In an Ask Me Anything session with the subreddit Tuesday, billionaire Mark Cuban encouraged the forum to hold on to their GameStop shares if they could afford to do so. After all, while $167 billion in value has been zapped from the popular stocks in a matter of days, the group is still up more than $100 billion since the start of the year. On average, those companies' shares are still up 72% in 2021. It's a reminder of the difficulties and yet significance of market timing. Anyone who bought a few days ago at the top has likely been burned, while early comers are still sitting on sizable gains. Noah Williams, 36, of Atlanta, says he still owns 1,100 shares of GameStop. He originally got it at $16 a share and gradually took profits as the stock surged, and says he paid off his student debt. Since then, he's held on even as the swings are starting to get wilder. I'm still up on GameStop. I'm not worried about that, said Williams. He added, I'm not buying anymore. I'm good. For Jordan Neumeier, 24, the GameStop saga is more than just a game. Last week, the engineer and part-time Twitch streamer sold his original investment in the stock at $128 a share, after buying in a month ago when GameStop was trading around $20, pocketing a tidy profit, or what the forum's members call tendies, short for chicken tenders. But after he sold, Neumeier decided to buy again, scooping up shares at $280. Asked about the bout of seller's remorse, he said, tendies looked tasty, took them out of the oven. Hedge funds thought they could run the show and stop us normies from buying, so now I'm back in and it's personal. GameStop closed below $100 a share on Tuesday for the first time in over a week. It's money that I'm not afraid to lose, Neumeier said from the greater Los Angeles area. It's like going to the roulette table and putting it all on black. So, GME go brrr.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can now afford, because the saga was just beginning when we taped the previous episode. Now it appears to be towards its end, but it's like a pandemic. It can have a second wave. This was also nice. I mean, it was just glorious. I think it was just, maybe not the first time, but one of the very rare cases where you would find both middle-class left-wing pricks and normal people, mostly of the middle class, both going, what, fuck the hedge fund managers, why not?
Yeah, they did have a point to not exactly invest but speculate. And they did have a valid point at the beginning with all those millions, tens of millions of naked shorts that were on the market, and that was even obvious, as in that's actually public information. You go on Yahoo Finance, you type in $GME, and you see there that the math doesn't add up. There are 120 million shares of GameStop, but the actual shorted positions are 140 million.
Right. What I'm saying is that even if, of course, there were and are quite a few loonies in this whole story. For the most part, however, they have a point. They do. Now, of course, some of them are there for deeply emotional and, dare I say, irrational reasons. Like, oh my God, in the Great Recession, they bailed out the bankers, man, and all of that jazz. I'm not saying bailing out bankers is a good idea. It's not. But burning your own capital, cutting your own nose to spite the opponent, I'm just saying. I mean, if you want to outbank the bankers, you might as well do it smartly. But at the same time, it's kind of like that graph, right? You have the low IQ, dollar GME go brrr, and the high IQ, some shady hacker saying we can stay retarded more than they can stay solvent. And somewhere in the middle of the curve, of the IQ bell curve, you have all of these soy boys and soy cocks from the cathedral media going in and saying, oh, but the hedge funds are the heroes. And but, I mean, the way the cathedral media has treated this was just so bloody glorious. It would have taken 3, 4, maybe 5 years of propaganda to red pill 5 million radicals into looking in what naked shorts are, what a fiat currency is, why big government is terrible. It takes a while to red pill those people. It's possible. It's definitely possible. But propaganda can only take you that much and that fast. This particular episode just created 5 or 6 million more radicals in a week. So, from that perspective, I mean, those people are much more likely to vote, speak, and spend the way we would prefer than they were just in November 2020. I'm just saying. So looking at 22 in the perspective, things are good.
Yeah.
Things are good. Have you bought into the...
Man, I wish this happened back when I was investing back in 2015. even if the main intent wouldn't have been to make money, but the way it looked, considering that it was an orchestrated effort, and even as much as you can bet on retards on Reddit all buying into one stock. What I'm looking at with skepticism is that this was something like a proof of concept. See if it can be done to rally a sort of public opinion and to actually have them to put money in this, regardless of the reason. Because when you're investing, especially your first time on the stock market, there are generally two types of people and two types of emotional reactions. First, there are the obsessive types, which I was up to a point where you look at the way the price is going at every second, and it's really about your own money. So you're afraid when for example, you see the stock in 30 seconds drop down a bit, and then you see the minus going even deeper and deeper. Then there's the other side of people that actually don't give a shit and treat it as a gambling tool.
That's me. That's me. I've stopped taking the stock market seriously about 20 years ago, I think, or 15 years ago, when it became clear, I used to like mathematics quite a lot. Now, I'm not as good in mathematics as I was 15 years ago because I haven't been practicing. But, for most normie activities like evaluating a pandemic or looking at the stock market, I'm definitely good enough. The math was just not adding up. I don't even remember what was the event that triggered me stopping giving a shit about the stock market. Thing is that since then, I'm like, this has nothing to do with the real economy.
Oh yeah.
Therefore, let's treat it as such. And ever since, I've been treating it as my personal casino to toy with a little bit. My guilty pleasure. I have a lot of guilty pleasures, such as sports gambling, but that one I treated as a serious business. In 2020, I'm up $1,000 and something on a sports bet. Or pandemic betting, which I'm up over like 100% of the bets. Well, not 100%, but 95 something. So yeah, when I saw it going from 16 to 30 something, I'm like, okay, let's open up Revolut app. Let's put in $50. What could possibly go wrong? Let's put another $50. What could possibly go wrong? And then when it was going at about 190 a share, I hit the sell button because
I kind of on the propaganda front. What was a huge achievement is that it showed exactly that the hedge funds with the mutual funds and with the regulators, they're all in the same bed.
Yep.
Because probably if you invest in Revolut, they already must have informed you that a few days ago that they're no longer capable to buy in your name shares in GameStop because some trade council in the US has suddenly upped the sum. No, it wasn't the SEC, it was the DTC.
Oh, those wankers in Massachusetts.
It was the DTC.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who suddenly upped the capitalization required for external actors to join in the US stock market trading.
I know someone that can give me that capitalization. I mean, if I were in for the kicks, I wasn't. I was in for the shekels. But if I were in for the kicks, I would have been able to match that. But yeah, the thing is that, of course, various depending on who is on which subsection of the Wall Street bets you're looking, because they are on factions as well. If you're looking at their left-wing faction, which I was the most interested in because I wanted to see in real time how they red pill themselves. Of course, they got into the. To them, it was definitive proof that they're all playing in the same game. Yes, welcome to corporatism. We've been trying to explain this to you for for several years. But more important than that, some of them went on to kind of weird type of narratives, as in, how dare the normies do this and they just hate. No, they just hate losing money. There's nothing personal. This is another lesson that you all should be learning. It's nothing personal, it's just business. And if you want to make it political, fine, you should, but that's not the way to make it political. The way to make it political is to take down the regulators a peg or two, because now you understand why we hate regulators, because regulators suck. And they are rarely helping, or not necessarily helping, but they're rarely in favor of the free market as it should be. Or no, regulators are usually there to pick winners and losers. That's the fundamental philosophy of the Democratic Party, is the fundamental philosophy of any government bureaucracy. I mean, you can say that some bureaucrats are Republican, I don't care. If they're bureaucrats, eventually they end up internalizing the mindset that is specific to bureaucracies. As Ronald Reagan used to say, the closest thing to eternal life is a temporary governmental program. I think it was a proof of concept, because I've seen other stocks now, also meme stocks, that have been going up without any logic behind them. I'm observing with great attention and concern, as our president would say, because maybe I can make another shekel or two of that. One more aspect to notice before we move on: Bloomberg, very serious finance publication, titles "Meme Stocks." Again, this would have been unimaginable just 2 years ago, let alone 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. Meme stocks. Meme stocks. Hopefully by 2024 they will seriously have to make a headline. Meme president decides, or meme vice president decides something. All right, speaking of the president, whatever, meme president, CNN, Cho Bai Den tells House Democrats to stick together in COVID-19 relief push, signals willingness to narrow stimulus checks. President Joe Biden told the House Democrats on a conference call Wednesday he's open to narrowing the distribution of $1,400 stimulus checks in his COVID-19 relief proposal to focus on poor and middle-class people, according to audio of the call obtained by CNN. Obtained. Them operatives, leaked it to you. Okay, I think we can better target the number, he said, according to the recording. In the call, Cho Bai Den also warned his party about the dangers of engaging in intra-party battles, contending their strength is in their unity with narrow majorities in both the House and the Senate. we hold a small majority in the House and the best majority and the barest majorities in the Senate, and we're going to succeed or fail together, Biden said. There have been 3 Democratic presidents in 28 years. Each one faced a tough midterm loss that cost a lot. It happened in 94 and it happened in 2010. We don't want to let that happen here, so let's stay together.
Yeah, sure.
Cho Bai Den made clear he wasn't willing to dramatically drop the $1.9 trillion price tag for his plan, but also said he's willing to make the stimulus checks more narrowly targeted. Biden told House Democrats the additional 1,400 stimulus checks are a key component of the White House package, saying of the checks people need it, and frankly they've been promised it. I think we can better target the number. I'm okay with that, but I'm not going to start my administration by breaking a promise to the American people. Yes, you will. Biden later emphasized he wants to relieve, I guess they meant, to go to poor and middle class families, saying I don't think we need to be in the business of helping those folks making 300 grand a year. That point could help Biden win over some centrist Senate Democrats, namely Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, who has called for more targeted relief. With a 50-50 Senate, Biden needs to ensure that all wings of the party are united if they're unable to win over GOP backing. I don't think the problem is that we're going too big to deal with this crisis. The problem is we're going too small. Biden also mentioned the $600 billion relief plan proposed by Republicans as a non-starter, saying it's not in the cards to compromise to that low of a number. Oh yes, you will. There's compromises available, Biden told the House Democrats, but the idea that we're going to go out and compromise and go from 1.9 trillion to 600 billion is just not, it's just not in the cards. Yeah, that's how he phrased it. It's just not, it's just right. So that's Cho Bai Den for you of the Bison party. How about just open up the economy and forget the goddamn stimulus checks? Is that really that difficult? In fairness, they've been doing that too with the opening up of the economy.
Yeah, but we're gonna legislate aside the fact that the economy started opening up only after Biden got elected.
In blue states.
In blue states,
in the red states has been opening up
in blue
since
states, which unfortunately they are the main economic drivers of the U.S. War, yeah, fair point to that.
Not anymore. I mean, you know, some of the smartest people in California, they moved to Texas. With almost a year of lockdowns, we'll see how much of a powerhouse is left in blue states. I'm just saying. And as Tom Woods would be saying, Tom Woods being a libertarian intellectual, which I urge you to follow on COVID-19 issues, the guy is just brilliant because he has the autism necessary to collect graphs on every single US state, and ask you, he puts a graph from various counties of the same states, and can you point out which one of them had the mask mandate and which one didn't? As Tom Woods would be saying, even the Karens who whine about you keeping your muzzle under your nose, even those go on vacation in Florida because at some level even they know just how much anti-human their own states have become. So that's why I'm saying they were the powerhouses. We'll see how much of that remains. I guess we'll have to wait for the first quarter data.
It's gonna be disastrous, but
divided by state. I mean,
it's gonna be disastrous not in the case of the US, but in the case of the whole planet. Now it's just a matter of how bad could it get.
Yeah, and I suspect there will be. Actually, I'm pretty optimistic for our area of the world, with the intermarium, because we've been ignoring everything with great efficiency lately, and with nice protests too, especially in Czechia and Vienna. But Vienna is not really in intermarium, although they want to. It's gonna be a difference for sure. The places that just simply didn't buy into the panic after the month of May, and those that still do, and those that still have, and some of them still do, like Boris's fiefdom. How's the lockdown there going, boys? Can you buy chips from the wrong store, or you still need the license for it? I mean, at some point it's gonna have to start becoming just a meme and just laugh about it, because why not? At some point you have to just say, what, screw it. And in France there is that trending hashtag Merci Boomer, At some point, enough, especially of the young people, will say, you know what, fuck grandpa, fuck grandma, screw you, cough. Because at some point you cannot expect to see a peaceful, how do you call it, peaceful reaction, right? After something like this, in the Netherlands they're just burning cities now, because they have especially young people's culture is every night go out, drink a lot of beer, smoke some weed, be ill, go home, sleep, rinse and repeat. So now you tell them that they're not allowed to leave their house during the night, and they're not allowed to go to stadiums, they're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. Well, what the fuck do you expect them to do? After 40 years of cultivating that particular type of culture, with very little or no limits on it, and I'm thinking, I'm not thinking of legal limits, but rather morality limits, with no kind of limits on that. And now you tell them, oh, you're not supposed to do that because grandma will die, and they're obviously going to say, so what? But it's still gonna be fun. As for $1.9 trillion, Christ Almighty, what are they spending on that much money? Because as far as I recall, and there was a bipartisan consensus on that before the November the 3rd election, with 700 billion you could pay $1,800 to each American citizen. So the Republican plan basically achieves exactly the same thing, but it just happens to be less than a third of the Democrat version of the plan. So what are they spending that shekels on?
Well, it's obvious what they're going to spend it on. They're going to send some money to the population, okay, but they're also going to send the money to friends of the party.
Right. I keep on forgetting.
We've seen this movie before. It's you got the plebs, you got the nomenclature, and then you got the political class.
Right. The friends of the party. Because I remember there was one version of the bill floating around. I don't think it's still on the table in the House of Representatives, although I wouldn't be surprised if it still is. It included in the COVID relief bill, there was something like gender mainstreaming programs in Pakistan. What does that have to do with anything? And that's the problem with the parliamentary procedure, basically, in the US Congress, because you have a lot of these kinds of pork-bloated dollars put into omnibus bill packs, which is insane. I mean, if you want to give shekels to friends of the party in Pakistan, fine, then make a bill about that, and that's okay. And you have your majority, you're probably going to pass it, but just be honest about things.
Yeah, it's going to pass the House.
It could pass the Senate too. Well, Tulsi Gabbard wouldn't vote for that. Yeah, but she's no longer in the Senate, so I guess you could compromise. Just name it Friends of the Party in Pakistan Act instead of gender mainstreaming, and that would win over some centrist Democrats.
Yeah, but looking at the bigger picture, I don't exactly remember who am I quoting right now. But he said something to the tune of the fall of democracy is going to come when people realize that they can vote the benefits that they're going to get.
Oh yeah, vote themselves, vote benefits to themselves.
Yeah, vote benefits to themselves. This looks an awful lot like that.
Yeah, but it's only with the nomenclature of the party rather than the entirety of the populace. But yeah, it's gonna be glorious. Meanwhile, while Cho Bai Den is very busy with gender mainstreaming in Pakistan and spending $1.9 trillion on a program that could cost just as little as 700 billion, International Business Times, China has stolen the personal data of 80% of American adults, says a report. The Chinese government may have stolen personal data from 80% of American adults, according to a 60 Minutes report. Bill Evanina, a former director of the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center, on Sunday appeared on CBS 60 Minutes when he warned that Beijing is attempting to collect and exploit Americans' healthcare information, including their DNA. According to the intelligence official, BGI Group, the world's largest biotech firm, approached Washington and 5 other states with offers to build and run state-of-the-art coronavirus testing labs. The Chinese firm also promised to provide technical expertise, high throughput sequences, and make additional donations to the states. The offer raised suspicions, prompting Evanina to issue warnings to the states against taking up BGI Group's proposal. Foreign powers can collect, store, and exploit biometric information from COVID tests, the advisory read. Knowing that BGI is a Chinese company, do we understand where the data is going? Evanina also claimed that China used less than honorable methods to steal data from foreign countries, including hacking healthcare companies and technology such as smart homes, sensors, and 5G networks in the US to collect Americans' personal data. Current estimates are that 80% of American adults have had all of their personally identifiable information stolen by the Communist Party of China, he said. The information collected from various technology, when combined with a person's biodata, can be used to bypass doctors and help Chinese companies create a monopoly over treatments and medicine that could improve a person's health. The same system has allegedly been used by Chinese authorities to identify and suppress the Uyghur Muslims. Under the guise of free checkups, Chinese officials are collecting DNA that could help them target other family members and improve their facial recognition software. In July 2020, the US Department of Commerce sanctions 2 Chinese subsidiaries of BGI Group for its involvement in the repression of the Uyghurs. BGI Group later released a statement that dismissed Evanina's claims and denied any of the alleged motivations. The notion that the genomic data of American citizens is in any way compromised through the activities of BGI in the US is groundless, they said in a statement. Beijing has previously been accused of breaching persons' privacy. In July 2020, the New York Times, a former newspaper, reported that police in China were using US equipment to collect blood samples from Chinese men and boys in an effort to build a genetic map of China's male population. Thermo Fisher, an American company, helped manufacture and provide Chinese police with testing kits needed to collect the samples. So, yeah, and of course, Cho Bai Den of the Baizhou party made no comments about this. I'm sure that's just a pure coincidence. And of course, nobody in America, in the American media, noticed the story. I mean, you know, the International Business Times is a British outlet, if I recall correctly. Yeah. And you know, the American media is not out of partisanship. They didn't even notice this story when Trump was in office, and they were running the narrative that Trump was paying his taxes in China and whatever. So you know, they could have at least used that to. But no, they just didn't notice the story, because the American media is populated by NPCs. It really is.
By NPCs running Huawei code.
Yes. Jesus Christ, man. Now, is this really that serious, the way this report is claiming it? Probably not. The point of intelligence reports is to, it's kind of like in epidemiology, right? In epidemiology, you have to claim 1 million deaths, and if it's only going to be 100, whatever, at least you did your job and pressed the decision factors, as they call it, to make a rightful decision from your adherent to scientism dogma perspective. Same thing goes in intelligence, right? If the claim is 80%, it's probably 30, but still it's 30 too much. I mean, you know, even in the most optimistic scenario, that's still almost a third of the population whose data, biometric data and identifiable personal data is circulating through CCP servers. I would count that as a scandal. In my book, that's kind of a pretty fucking terrible.
And not just that, and the companies that that collaborated with China, for example, Thermo Fisher, and God knows how many other more.
Yeah, and this kind of story should have been on the front page of every single outlet. It's not, and it's not because again, sometimes it's the case, yes, that journalists are basically paid stooges of the CCB. Yes, that's true. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time it's just plain old stupidity. I mean, many of them, they just simply don't understand the gravity of the problem. And in this situation, you know, it's not the end of the world, but it's something that definitely warrants a more serious investigation rather than a 60 minutes report. That's what I'm saying. Because again, even if only a fraction of the report is true, it's still pretty damn terrible. But on the other hand, I guess you know, spreading the panic about this could help in flattening some of that sweet techno-optimism, which is great. I mean, you know, and slowly but surely get the plebs to keep on checking whether the tech that they're using is China related, and if it is, to drop it. In 2012, when I adopted this mindset, I was of course an extremist, and ever since 2012, usually around October, although I didn't do that in October 2020, but I did it in October 2019, I make a full audit in my house to see if there's anything made in China, and if it is, make sure to figure out how I got it, why I got it, and whether I can prevent that from happening in the future. And the last audit in October 2019 came out pretty well. I mean, I just had a plate made in China, and I think a cable or something like that, and that was pretty much it. Everything else was made somewhere else, not in China, right? The cams are made in Japan, the tripods are made in Romania. Almost every piece of equipment is just not made in China. It's possible, because I hate this idea that, but it's impossible to get... No, it's not. No, it's not.
No, the Chinese are slowly making it impossible by themselves, but why not help them just a little bit to outsource them out of the global workshop mentality, or should I say global sweatshop mentality?
A sweatshop mentality, right?
That's more suitable for what happens in China.
Right. The thing is that at the end, it's just like with Wall Street bets, right? You can use your shekels to vote. Every time you spend money, you vote in favor of the product that you're buying and against the competing products that you could have bought but chose not to. Now, admittedly, at least for those of you who take the pandemic bullshit seriously, that's kind of a problem, because if you don't buy from physical stores, then you cannot really check whether it's made in China or not. And so that's another further reason why you shouldn't be ordering things, but rather go physically and examine something before you buy it. But again, this reads like a lot more serious than it probably is. Use this link and give it to normies, because it's kind of hard to call International Business Times as a conspiracy theory outlet, right? So when you tell them that China is building a person of interest type of society, person of interest, the TV show, you can just use this article to make your case. And by the way, that's another way to discover the shills in your circles, because they'll get triggered really, really fast. If you use a person of interest reference, the shills are the first to be triggered by it, and they'll just latch onto the story to try to prove you wrong, and then you'll know who to block. All right, let's get on our side of the pond. Euronews. Mario Draghi, the ex-European Central Bank chief, accepts president's mandate to form the next government. Oh, this will be fun. Former European Central Bank President Mario Draghi has agreed to form a new Italian government amid the country's political crisis over coronavirus recovery funds. Italian President Sergio Mattarella gave Draghi, age 73, a mandate to do so on Wednesday after negotiations between political parties failed to produce a government coalition. He told reporters that he was committed to ending the pandemic, completing the vaccination campaign, and relaunching the country. Mattarella told Italians on Tuesday night that they had no choice but to form a new government. The urgency of these crises means that there could be a new government by the end of the month, but predictions are very difficult, especially in the Italian context, which is very unstable and politically fragmented, said Dr. Davide Vampa, a lecturer in politics at Aston University. If most MPs do not support Draghi, there could likely be an early election in the midst of the pandemic. In 2020, Italy's gross domestic product fell 8.8% and nearly 450,000 jobs were lost, the country's national statistics agency reported this past week. So in reality, it's more like 10% and at least 1.1 million jobs were lost, but we'll get outside. Over the weekend, the Chamber of Deputies President Riccardo Fico held talks with political parties in the hopes of forming a new political government. Those negotiations, however, were unsuccessful. Former ECB chief Draghi is credited for playing a large role in preserving the euro, Europe's common currency, during the debt crisis. He was also previously governor of the Bank of Italy. Renzi, who had been Italian prime minister between 14 and 16, shared his support for Mattarella's decision, stating that must accept the appeal and support Draghi. But it's not clear whether the Five-Star Movement, which has the most seats in parliament, will be supportive. Vito Cribi, leader of the anti-establishment establishmentarian party, had said the only person capable of leading the country seriously and effectively through this particularly complex phase is Giuseppe Conte. Honk, honk. It is also unclear whether this government will be technocratic, that is formed by non-partisan experts, or political, says Van Bob. There will depend on the negotiations in the next days and the range of parliamentary groups willing to support him. The last time the country had a technocratic government was from 11 to 13, when former EU Commissioner Mario Monti was tapped to form a cabinet to address the debt crisis following the resignation of Silvio Berlusconi. I don't think most Italians have fond memories of the previous technocratic government, especially considering that Mario Monti was not just tapped to form a cabinet. No, he was imposed by the unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. That's exactly what it was, and and Silvio Berlusconi didn't exactly resign, but for the first time in his entire life, he was just his abilities to cling to office, which are extraordinary in and of themselves, were just not enough because Brussels dictated otherwise. So yeah, I don't think most Italians are really fond of a new technocratic government. I think they have the same allergy to a technocratic government like we do.
Yeah, not to mention what happened with Italy while Draghi was president of the ECB.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad start in order to form a new government when you got a lot of skeletons in the closet in your own country. that you are supposedly intending to rule over.
Get through a set of crises and whatnot. Well, Draghi doesn't have a skeleton in a closet. He has the whole graveyard.
Yeah.
They take like a 1400, a graveyard that's been in use since the 1400s. He has all of those skeletons in his closet. Of course, the right-wing faction, more or less embodied by Salvini, they definitely wanted a snap election, of course. Yeah. I don't know. This chap Vampa, the academic, he has a point. Generally, predictions are pretty difficult to make when it comes to Italian politics, but for the most part, I've been able to get them correctly, but not this time. This time is just so tight, the space of maneuvering between the factions in the Italian parliament is just so tight that quite literally anything is possible. I mean, why not once again a coalition with Berlusconi and Lega and Movimento 5 Stelle? Why not? It sounds impossible, but it's not. And if that happens, of course, Mario Draghi's government goes pizdoi na krytia, because ain't nobody gonna vote for that. So I presume that what they will try is to get the Democrats and Renzi's small party and the so-called middle group, which is basically their version of USR. And there are a few other small factions, and basically construct a majority out of that, and of course get Forza Italia on board somehow. You gotta give something to Berlusconi, basically, because that's how it works, kind of like the mafia. And technically speaking, it would be possible, and maybe convince a portion of the Movimento 5 Stelle's MPs to vote for the Draghi cabinet, and then eventually, with the understanding that the Draghi cabinet would be a minority cabinet, so just get them through the vote of confidence, but then resume to usual business. This has been done before. It's not particularly outstanding, but if that would be the case, then what kind of reforms could Draghi even attempt to make? Because without parliamentary support, yeah, sure, he can rule by decree for a while, but elections are just less than 1 year and a half from now. Anything that he does and it happens to be unpopular, gets wiped out in the next elections, and you get a very, very big and fat and smiley Salvini as prime minister. That's how this ends, right? However, if you trigger snap election, that still ends with the smiley face.
It's a matter of whether you want your dish served right now, you want to serve later.
Yeah, so you get Salvini, Premier Salvini in 2021 in May, or do you want him in July 2022? So take your pick. Now, admittedly, if I were part of their establishment, of their centrist, whatever, I would try it in 2022 because at the very least, until then, you have the time to flatten some of the pandemic insanity, the populist appeal dries up a little bit. On the other hand, if I were a cynical bastard, I would say, no, let's get Salvini prime minister now, because Salvini is not prepared to take the country out of the crisis. You know that, right? So, he will make a fool out of himself. Now, I presume Salvini is smart enough to not to take in such an offer, unless he has some capable counselors that he wasn't having a year and a half ago. Unless he has that, then otherwise he should stay away from power until next year, basically. But if he doesn't, and he becomes prime minister, whether through snap elections or through a vote of confidence in parliament, that would be pretty terrible, because Lega would get flattened by the next round of elections. So. But then again, those of us with the Latin gene, we tend to be, as people, pretty cranky, pretty, I mean, it's very difficult. Sometimes, when it is the most irrational choice possible, that's the choice we're going to make just because we can. I mean, sometimes that happens. I mean, it really does. It really is the case. You've seen it in Canada, for instance, when the Québécois voted for the most far-right party just because they could. When it was the least logical way, logical period to do so, that's exactly what they did. Because why not? So don't write off the Italian people. They might pull in something like that, just for the kicks, basically. All right, just for the kicks. Alrighty, this is fun. Deutsche Welle. France presses Germany to ditch Nord Stream 2 over Navalny. French European Affairs Minister Clement Beaune on Monday said France had urged Deutschland to drop the Nord Stream 2 project, particularly after recent mass arrests of supporters of detained Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The United States and several European countries, such as Poland, have strongly criticized the building of the pipeline, saying it will increase German and EU reliance on Russia for critical gas supplies. France has been less vocal in its opposition, but has voiced concern. We have always said we have the greatest doubts on this project in this context, Beaune told France Interradio. Beaune was asked if Paris wanted Berlin to drop the project. He said, indeed, we have already said this, he answered. The calls came after Vladimir Putin's crackdown on the opposition led by Navalny, who was arrested in mid-January and faces a trial that could see him detained for years. Yes, 2 years and 8 months update. It has already happened. Sanctions have already been imposed. We could do that, but we have to be clear they will not be enough. The Nord Stream 2 option is one under consideration, Beaune said, while acknowledging that it's a decision for Deutschland because the pipeline is in Germany. The European Parliament has also demanded that the pipeline's construction should be put on hold immediately. Berlin is demanding Navalny's release, but on Monday, Chancellor Angela Merkel's spokeswoman Martina Fitz said the government had not changed its mind on Nord Stream 2. Fitz said she had no new updates on the new project, which Merkel strongly supports. The government has not changed its basic position, she told reporters. Work resumed on Nord Stream 2 in December after being on hold for almost a year because of American sanctions. Green Party politician Jürgen Trittin, a former German environment minister, told Deutsche Welle he believed cancellation of the pipeline would be futile. The pipeline's Russian developers would receive legal damages from Germany while still being able to export their gas by other means. I've never been a friend of this pipeline, but to stop it at this point would possibly have a very high price without achieving any real effect. After all, Russia has plenty of opportunities to export its gas via other routes. Then fine, then don't build it. Meanwhile, Renate Alt, a Bundestag lawmaker with Germany's pro-business Free Democrats, said she believed the moratorium should be imposed on the building of the project. It's important now that a stop to construction, a moratorium is imposed until the Russian side moves as far as the clarification of the positioning of Alexei Navalny is concerned, she told Deutsche Welle. As long as this is not clear and as long as these protests are put down so brutally, we must not allow the pipeline to simply continue to build. Russian energy giant Gazprom, the main investor in the project, says Nord Stream 2 is now 94% complete. Nord Stream 2 consists of two pipes, each around 1,230 kilometers long, and will be expected to deliver tens of billions of cubic meters of natural gas per year from Russia to Deutschland. Meanwhile, Der Spiegel, which is usually the position of the establishment, so whenever you see an editorial from Der Spiegel, that's usually their deep state speaking. So Der Spiegel editorial in English: a Russian pipeline is Germany's greatest foreign policy embarrassment. I'll leave the link in the low bar for you all to read. The narrative on this project has changed tremendously over the last 4 months. We've been working, by we I mean we on the sofa. I've been working on this, going and lobbying directly to business leaders at the Intermarium summits, and not just there, in other meetings as well, lobbying against Nord Stream 2, and always seemed like we're hitting a brick wall. Kind of like Vladimir Ilyich Lenin used to say, right? Sometimes for decades nothing happens, and then in weeks decades happen. That's basically how it was the case here, right? For 3 or 4 years, it seemed like nothing was happening, and we're just hitting a brick wall when we kept on saying Gazprom man bad, Nord Stream 2 man bad. And then suddenly, in just the last 3 or 4 months, now you see Der Spiegel going in, yeah, the Nord Stream 2 kind of man bad. And the article is pretty devastating on the German government, the article from Der Spiegel, where they say that, yeah, okay, we might have to pay some reparations, whatever. Yeah, sure, that's still good enough. It's still better than finishing it. And also lambasts the Green Party politicians who basically act as a bunch of fucking hypocrites, as always. Oh, my environment, but when it favors Russia, then fuck the environment, right? Well, now, of course, almost everyone has opposite positions than what they should, right? The so-called Free Democrats, we are the libertarians, right? You would expect them to support the project just because of my economy, and they said, like, yeah, probably not, which is okay. I think that's a sensible position, but it's not a libertarian position; it's a conservative position. I'm just saying. But then again, with the conservative space being long left behind by CDU's march towards the far left, now someone has to scrap to occupy the conservative position. So some of it to AFD, some of it to FDP, whatever. It just happens. But yeah, the narrative has changed a lot. Now there is a case to be made that whatever excuse is being used to flatten Nord Stream 2 is good enough, right? At least from our perspective, from looking at it from the Intermarium, be like, just stop that goddamn thing already, right? On the other hand, Navalny is not necessarily the best excuse.
Oh, he definitely isn't, but looking at it from a geopolitical perspective, if Nord Stream 2 gets finished, that's a major stab in the back from the German side towards the Eastern Europeans. Probably the Germans want to experience as well what we've experienced, what was it, 10 or 12 years ago, when we weren't exactly close to freezing to death, but remember when the Russians had arguments with the Ukrainians and they suddenly closed the tap on gas?
Yes.
We at least had some reserves, but the rest of the other countries around us didn't.
Yeah, there was no problem in Romania, but a lot of problems in Bulgaria, a lot of problems in Hungary, a lot of problems in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. Smack down in the middle of winter, the Russians just closed the tap on the gas supply.
January 2014, I think it was, right? Or probably even slightly earlier. I think it was in 2014. But yes, there was a disagreement over the shipment fees that Russia and Gazprom, of course, was paying to either Belarus or Ukraine.
Yeah, no, it was the Ukraine. I remember that much clearly. Yeah. So probably the Germans want to experience that sort of honk themselves, but they're going to experience that one at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah. And geopolitically, that could be a problem. That's what Der Spiegel is warning about. They're saying, like, look, we Germany may be the powerhouse of Europe, but still, if 26 out of 27 countries in Europe, they say that kind of Nord Stream 2 man bad, if they decide to isolate us in the EU, it's kind of possible. I mean, it's not difficult to get a qualified majority against Germany. And if that happens, then it's going to be, at first it may seem like a terrible idea for all of the, especially the countries that rely on Germany, and I'm talking here about every single neighbor of Germany. At first it may seem like a terrible idea, but if you look at it over a year or 2 or 3, it's actually worse for Germany, because of course Germany treats all of the EU institutions as domestic institutions. And when those suddenly stop being domestic, then the very point of the EU becomes a problem. And that would suddenly mean that the EU is disadvantageous for Germany, which never happened until now, basically, right? So that's a serious danger, because Der Spiegel, of course, warns that that would suddenly increase some Euroscepticism within Germany itself, which is, at this point is pretty rare. It is, but it exists, but it's not a serious force like it is in France or in the Netherlands or Italy, or Poland more recently. But in Germany it's still pretty flattened. But get this kind of diplomatic boogaloo, it can get pretty terrible. And of course we know the German system is, they're afraid of anything that they perceive as radical or extremist or whatever.
Yeah, well, it isn't exactly extremist when when you make a pipeline that's pretty much a direct funnel into Gazprom's budget, right, and indirectly into Putin's budget.
Right. I mean,
for as long as he's gonna stay alive, but still.
Yeah, thou shalt not give shekels to Putin. That sounds like a very sensible position to me. And not just to me, more recently, the majority of the European Parliament believes like me. So 4 years ago, I was called in my face an insane extremist by two members of the European Parliament, actually. I checked, both of them voted for the resolution now. 4 years ago, they were spitting in my face, and now they voted for a resolution that basically says, like the SOFA, Nord Stream 2 man banned. The majority of the European Parliament believes like me. Most of the governments of the European Union right now believe like me. There are still a few undecided, as you can imagine. Portugal and Spain care very little about this.
Yeah, because they don't need gas,
They don't need gas. It's very far away from them, and at least when it comes to Spain, they have their own shady deals with Russia. And they might not want to piss them off on that, especially now, as Spain is pretty cash strapped. Gee, I wonder whose fault is that? And no, it's not the coronavirus. It's kind of like there is a cycle in Spanish politics, right? Every time PSOE gets to power, something fucked up happens, and usually it's all of the fucked ups at once. I was reading, and I just didn't put it in the podcast because it was getting too long. An entire criminal group in Almeria who got busted now. They were creating fake domestic violence cases to milk the government of feminist aid. and it was to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, so they had a very nice operation.
Very profitable, yes.
Yeah, well, the Gender Violence Act tends to be very generous with that. You just say that you were beaten up. Anyway, so they're leaking money everywhere, so I don't expect the Spanish government to be having a definitive position on Nord Stream 2 anytime soon. But the direct, what do they call it at the World Economic Forum? Stakeholders, right? The direct stakeholders, that would be Finland, Denmark, Germany, Poland, the Baltics, those that are around the pipeline. With the exception of Germany, everyone else be like, are we sure this is a good idea? That doesn't look good, because there's another aspect that's probably never going to be said in the press. Not that it's a secret, but it's considered marginal, but it's not. If it gets built, or when it gets built, whatever, it becomes part of something called, in the eyes of the international law and the domestic law of both Germany and Russia, critical infrastructure. Now, Germany doesn't have a fleet. So that will be the task of Russia to protect the critical infrastructure. That means espionage ships into the territorial waters of Poland. Let's just say that the Poles don't have very nice memories with that, and they might remember that they still have some very functional submarines that could poke a hole into. I'm just saying. You want to start a World War III? That's how you start World War III. That's a lot more likely than any of the rich imagination conspiracy theories peddled by CNN and other
Well, at least now I can sell information on how to sabotage deep sea pipelines to the poles. If anybody Polish is interested, do contact us.
Yeah, well, it's a very nice manual. There are quite a few manuals actually on how to sabotage these things. One of the nice things about the 1950s was that a lot of this kind of knowledge was just distributed freely for decades until late 70s. Really, you could just buy it off the shelf from the library and from the bookstore. Sorry, and then of course it was slowly faded away. It's still not classified material to this day, but it's more difficult to find. But yes, it's not like it's very difficult, and sometimes plebs can do it. Now, of course, that amounts to military terrorism, but you know, possessing the knowledge doesn't.
Well, it's in international waters, so is it really terrorism?
Well, I think most of it does go through territorial water. I don't know, actually.
This needs to be observed.
I'll have to look on the map exactly, because of course some of it is on Russian territorial waters. The Kaliningrad region has its own territorial waters, of course. Then there is at least a portion that goes through the Danish territorial waters. But I don't know if there is any portion that goes through Polish territorial waters. I suspect it's not, because Gazprom
for obvious reasons.
Yeah, Gazprom is not that idiotic. But I hope it does.
Yeah, we're gonna have to look in depth to the map of the pipeline.
Yeah, although I've seen that map several times at various summits, but I just never decided to zoom in on that particular detail. Now that I think about it, I should have. Well, it's not difficult. You just look up for the map on Google. It's not secret. Alright, sticking to Germany. Breitbart, every vaccine is welcome. Merkel looks to Russian jab amid EU vax blunders. Chancellor Angela Merkel said on Tuesday that Germany will consider using the vaccine developed by Russia as the European Union, Европейский союз, continues to struggle to inoculate their populations against the Chinese coronavirus. On Tuesday, the medical journal The Lancet said the Russian vaccine, the Sputnik V, was over 91% effective in blocking COVID-19 virus in clinical trials. Following the announcement, Merkel said that every vaccine is welcome in the Европейский союз, going on to praise the Russian jab's good data in comments reported by Deutsche Welle. Chancellor Merkel also revealed that she has spoken about the vaccine with the Russian President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Deutschland and the Европейский союз as a whole have struggled to meet the demand for coronavirus vaccinations, falling well behind the United Kingdom, the United States and Israel. While the EU has claimed that the slower rollout for the vaccine came as a result of stricter safety measures, Brussels ultimately approved the same 3 vaccines that were approved in the UK, in some cases just weeks later. Chancellor Merkel defended her country's vaccination rollout by claiming that 10 million Germans will be vaccinated by the end of March, and said that by the summer all residents will have been offered the vaccine. So far, only 1.85 million people have received their first dose of the vaccine in Germany. Oh my God, these guys are further behind Romania. That's terrible. It is true that in some areas the pace became slower, but there are good reasons for it to be slower, Merkel said, adding, "We can't make a rigid vaccination plan." Come on, you're German, you can make a rigid plan. Jesus Christ. In contrast to Germany, the United Kingdom has already vaccinated 10 million people, despite having a significantly smaller population, 67 million compared to 83 million in the European economic powerhouse. On Sunday, German health Führer Jens Spahn suggested that the vaccines developed in China and Russia could be used in Germania. This comes despite the health concerns about the Chinese and Russian vaccines, both of which have been administered to their populations before clinical trials were completed. That's how the party works, comrade. Regardless of the country in which a vaccine is manufactured, if they are safe and effective, they can help cope with the pandemic, Spahn said. The vaccination program in Germany and the European Union at large has come under increasing criticism, with the editor of the German tabloid newspaper Bild, Peter Tiede, describing the fiasco as the EU's vaccine rollout as the biggest confidence-destroying program in its history. Last week, the German national newspaper Die Zeit characterized the European Commission's vaccination regime as the best advertisement for Brexit.
When the tabloids are making fun of you, you know that you fucked up in monumental proportions.
And particularly Die Zeit, which tends to be pro-deep state, pro-system often. And now Bild has been cheeky for many decades, so you know it's not very surprising when Bild does this. But when Die Zeit does it, that's like, and fact check true. Yes, it is the best advertisement for for Brexit for sure. At least if you consider a success, injecting more people with experimental drugs, then I guess on that front, definitely Brexit turned out to be a good idea. And whether that actually works or not, it remains to be seen. As far as I know, AstraZeneca is not a particularly great one, which is probably why Oxford is now looking to work with the Russian Institute for Immunology and maybe combine the two and things like that. I hope it works. I'm not in principle against the idea. Russia has been developing vaccines, pretty efficient ones, for several decades. It's not like it's impossible for a good product like this to come out from Russia. If it were a nano chip, then I would have been very skeptical. Russians aren't particularly great
in semiconductors.
In semiconductors, right. But if it's a vaccine, well, since the 50s, they've been churning out pretty decent vaccines. So there is a history there. And of course, this time around as well, they are working on standard technology of vaccines, namely to use a dead virus, essentially, or partially cucked virus, right? I'm sure that's not the scientific term, but you get the point. As for the...
It's fun on the narrative front.
Oh yes.
That we can chalk up another win on the that was delivered by Lord and Savior Corona Chan. That everybody got repelled on the huge organizational inertia that the Europейский союз is capable of on this topic. So have it approved weeks later and not only fuck up the distribution at the European level but at the national level as well in Germany of all places.
And that's considering the fact that Germany should have had not necessarily the best, but definitely a much better rollout than they do, because if we recall, almost a year ago, right, in April or March, but especially April 2020, Germany had a better cope with the huge influx to the ICU wards, precisely because it has those integrated private networks decided at Bundesland level at best, with the federal government having little involvement, and that turned out to be a much better model than almost everyone else in Europe, with the exception of Sweden, which Sweden, by the way, has the similar kind of model, very federative, and everyone else has a very centralized model, like literally everyone else except Germany and Sweden, at least from the EU. So, and even the UK, the UK is a very federative country, but the NHS is pretty centralized. In any event, so you would have expected them to have a better rollout precisely because all they had to do was to just use the same networks instead of relying on ICUs, to rely on empty rooms that can be converted into vaccination centers, which should not have been difficult. Logistically speaking, that's not difficult. If it was possible under the Romanian bureaucracies, then definitely it should have been possible in Germany. But it's not. And it's not because Европейский союз, the Европейский Commissariat, the European Commission, right, decided that they will be distributing the vaccine, right? Ursula von der Leyen decided that she knows better than everyone else in
how to logistics.
How to logistics, right? Which is just fun. Who told this lady that she could possibly know better how to logistics, better in terms of how to distribute on national level? Because that's the point. If you're going to say, okay, we, the EU, we're going to just, reserve various highways so you can have faster transportation, or basically streamline the process in various airports so you can transport it via airplanes faster, maybe we'll pay for the fuel or things like that. Okay, that could have been, but no.
That is so much unlike the EU. What do you mean? You mean free fuel? Dedicated supply line? No, that's not how the EU works. You need, and you can't exactly blame Ursula von der Leyen that she thinks like that, because everybody in the EU Parliament and the European Commission thinks like that.
Sure,
with an ass backwards approach and very pseudo intellectual.
Yeah, but at least the European Parliament was quite split on the idea. Even many in the European Parliament were like, how about we let the national governments handle this? Because and the argument in the European Parliament was, of course, the very correct one. Look, every single national government in Europe, all of them, have had to manage a vaccine rollout campaign at least 10 or 15 times over the last 50 years, or over the last 70 years. For sure. At least 15 times, especially those in the East, more than 15 times. Right? Because up until about the 80s, actually Eastern Europe had better vaccination programs than Western Europe. And you can see that in Germany, by the way, when it came to, I think it was the polio vaccination, where at some point the DDR was donating the vaccination doses for polio to West Germany, to the Bundesrepublik, because the Bundesrepublik was kind of terrible, kind of like now.
Well, indeed. Well.
So maybe it's a tradition, right? Or it could be politics, like the article that you put in the preliminary document for the podcast, and I didn't put it in the podcast, but I'll leave the link in the low bar for you all to read.
Vaccinations being
political. Right,
yeah.
Right. Admittedly, it's a terribly written article because it misses a lot of nuances, right? But then again, it's Deutsche Welle. You expect them to be pretty NPCs on these things. So it starts with the imperial vaccination law, which is correct. That's it starts very well, then it continues terribly, and the conclusion is meh. The conclusion is Merkelian, right? It doesn't take a position on anything, and it tries to be, although fundamentally the messaging is correct, namely that introducing any sort of mandatory vaccination scheme is just bound to fail. They're right. But at the same time, Germany, just like everyone else in the European Union right now, doesn't have the problem with the much of refusal. It has a huge problem of not being able to offer the experimental product that they call vaccine to those who want it. With the exception of France, every single country in the EU has a slight majority of people who want it, like now preferably, right? Like tomorrow.
It's an issue with the demand, not an issue with supply.
The other way around. It's an issue with supply, not with demand. Yeah, the demand is there, with the exception of France, right? In France, the so-called anti-vaxxers are a majority. Like 54% of the population be like, no, right? And of the 46 remained, only like 20 or 30 would be like, yes, please now. And another 16-17% be like, we'll see about that, right? But in Germany, it's like 60% yes now. Same thing in Italy, it's like 70% yes now. But where's the supply?
In Russia.
In Russia. The thing is, and that's another aspect to keep in mind, right? Orban Viktor of Magyarország has been pushing both the Chinese version, the Sinovac, and Sputnik V. Same did Serbia, by the way. But at least Serbia, being a small country, even smaller than Hungary, Serbia is actually faring pretty well with its vaccination program. They approved basically all of them, and it's fully voluntary, whatever. But in Hungary, it took a while until Sputnik V was approved. Finally, it was approved, but mostly over the head of various bureaucrats, because 1 day or 2 days after Orban Viktor announced that it's going to be available, some head of the health directorate came out and said, well, actually, we're not sure about that. But anyway, let's assume that Orban Viktor gets his wish. Still, he ordered 1 million doses of Sputnik V like 2 months ago.
Yeah,
10,000 have arrived.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to point on. That Hungary has already placed an order months back for the Sputnik V vaccine, and they still got just 10,000 out
maybe
of
30, whatever, but a marginal amount.
A marginal amount compared to the order. And Angela Merkel expects Sputnik V to be delivered along with the other doses for what is it? She still got 82 million people to vaccinate.
Okay, excluding children, because children are not included in the program. Sputnik V is probably not very efficient on very old people, but she still has another 40 million people to convince, to deliver to, who want it and want it delivered.
Yeah, I have this impression that at one point she's going to go to China in order to get a vaccine, because the Russians surely do not have the infrastructure to deliver that much.
Yeah, the expectation from Merkel is basically to sign some sort of collaboration with Russia. and just basically manufacture it in Germany, because it's a classical type of vaccine, and there is the infrastructure to manufacture industrially. The infrastructure to manufacture it exists already in Germany. So, well, actually, BioNTech is also made in Germany, so there's that. But yeah, that would still mean having it approved in Germany. And the way I know the bureaucracy in the health directorate in Germany, okay, it's not as low as the European Union one, sure. It's more efficient than, well, everyone, even Italy is more efficient than the European Commission, so, you know, but still it's pretty slow. I mean, best case scenario, you get that approved in May,
Yeah, so I was thinking somewhere around the summer, early summer, at the fastest.
Let's say in April you already know that you might get it approved, so you can start manufacturing then, start delivering in June. I'm thinking strictly on Sputnik V made in Germany, right? It's doable, but still you won't get the whole population by the end of the summer, as Merkel claimed. It's just not possible. Unless Pfizer pulls in a miracle and indeed they're going to be able to fulfill their promise to deliver 2 billion doses to the whole planet by the end of July, I think they said. I don't think that's possible either, by the way. I mean, you know, again, this is basic logistics. You don't have to be pro or against vaccine. You don't have to know anything about medicine. You just have to have worked in a warehouse. And those of us who worked in a warehouse are like, are you sure, mate? Because, you know, I say 2 billion doses. I'm already imagining how to transport those from warehouse to warehouse, especially at those conditions. At least the Russian.
At least the Russian one has more favorable the storage conditions, but
so is Johnson & Johnson. Yes.
But every other else, the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, which have to be kept at minus 80 degrees.
Yeah, the Pfizer one minus 80, and the Moderna, I think, minus 20 or something like that. It's still pretty low.
Well, at least with the Moderna vaccine, you can still carry it in one of those Thermo King containers, but. But the Pfizer one, no. There is no compressor that can hold minus 80 degrees constantly and not fucking explode.
Yeah, and with the Pfizer one, you also get those honks. We've seen a few in the United States, so we've seen a few in Europe as well, but most of them in the United States, where they vaccinated random people on the highway because the ambulance that was delivering them got stuck in snow, and they would have to be thrown away if they would have stayed for more than 3 hours. And there was no way they could remove the snow in 3 hours and get them to the destination. So basically, they vaccinated random people on the highway, which is okay, I guess. I mean, instead of throwing them out, but what I'm saying is that that's an additional logistical challenge it's a challenge even by military standards. And the idea of having it managed centrally for the whole continent of Europe by Ursula von der Leyen.
Even in the US, I don't remember the name of the company, but there was only one company on the entire continent that has the storage conditions for the Pfizer vaccine, and even when they deployed absolutely everything, they still fell short, very short.
Luckily, capitalization was very easy, so they could just print more containers. But still, I mean, it's a challenge. It is, and with the innovation suppressing legal climate that's been dominating Europe for 20 years, 27, 28 years now, since Maastricht, basically. I don't know. This whole optimistic hula baloo is just it's just funny. It's just funny to watch. So yeah, best advertisement for Brexit for sure. Die Zeit has it right for once. Die Zeit is usually wrong, but in this clown world, the Spectator is more rational than the Daily Mail. Die Zeit is more rational than it is what it is. It is what it is. Libertarians are pro lockdowns, and honk. The Moscow Times. Russia is ready to disconnect from global internet, Medvedev says. Now this is another honk. Russia is legally and technologically ready to disconnect from the global internet if needed, former President Dmitry Medvedev told Interfax on Monday. Russian authorities have long flirted with the notion of tougher restrictions and control over the internet on the Russian territory. While the country's sovereign internet law passed in 2019 gives Russia the ability to cut itself off from the rest of the World Wide Web, experts have expressed doubts that Russia was capable of implementing such technology. technology. While Medvedev said Russia is capable of isolating its internet from the global web, he stressed that he didn't see any reason to do so, calling it a double-edged weapon. Medvedev, who is currently deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, said the US retains key rights of control to the internet, which could result in Russia being disconnected from the global internet if something extraordinary happened. Pointing to another example, he also said Russia could also be disconnected from the SWIFT international payment system. We even had to create our own system for transmitting information so that we can exchange electronic messages if this suddenly happens, he said. Medvedev's statement comes on the heels of mass protests that swept more than 100 Russian cities over the past 2 weekends. The rallies were sparked by the detention of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny and the release of his Putin's Palace investigation that drew over 100 million views on YouTube. Last week, Russia's communications regulator said it would fine 7 social media companies for not taking down videos promoting the protests. So,
you spoke in the Romanian podcast, if not a few months back, at least a year back.
Yes,
about the same news article that apparently Russia is going to disconnect itself from the internet.
Yeah, and I said that's not going to happen.
Newsflash, it won't. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's been another year and a half since the law has been enforced. It still didn't happen. Now even the guy who defends the law says it's unlikely to happen. Yeah, the idea of a Ruski internet sounds probably very appealing to those on the ultra-Russian nationalist side, but it's just dumb. It is dumb. And now, of course, technically speaking, if you really want to, yes, it's possible. It's possible even with poorer countries. I mean, you can have your own Ugandan internet, right? It's possible. Of course it is. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I was working on creating networks here inside Romania, we had various intranets, sometimes were ranging for an entire city. So, it is possible, and only after creating that and experimenting it for months and whatever, then we would connect it to the World Wide Web when we got the capital necessary to do that. And so, it is possible, of course. I've personally run in intranets like these, ranging from 500 or 1,000 clients all the way up to 150,000 clients, and sometimes even slightly more than that, but no more than 200,000. So I know that it's possible from direct experience. So definitely, if you have the infrastructure necessary, it's possible even for 140, 150 million clients, which would be necessary in the case of a so-called Russian internet. So technically speaking, yes, it's possible. But is it doable logistically, once again? Because the logistics of that is complicated, especially once again if you have something called a map and you look at the territory of Russia and where the population centers are, because there are quite a few big enough population centers that are in the middle of fucking nowhere. All right. And some of them are very important, like the Tomsk, for instance, is one of the oldest technological centers of Russia that predates communism. Like from the 1890s, they've had a huge university there and whatnot. It has like 300,000 people, and a lot of technological innovation actually takes place there in that university, in that particular knowledge center. But on the map, it's pretty far away from anything civilized. So, good luck getting the logistics necessary to keep that center alive, whilst at the same time maintaining a Russian internet. No. No. Same thing goes with China, right? China would being the biggest experiment with the national internet. Even they have to stay connected to the World Wide Web.
Exactly. Because all those Chinese servers also still have to connect to the internet in order to do their updates. Right. But even then, say even if technically, if you would have the population momentum and the narrative ready and the infrastructure and obviously limitless money. You still can't do that because from what I've seen, one recent development that I like from Elon Musk is that he started rolling out his Starlink. So what could exactly stop a person in the middle of Tomsk to buy one of those satellite dishes and connect himself to the satellite internet? Yeah, but good luck blocking that one.
Sure, but not to mention that there is something called the satellite internet already available, and has been available since the 2000s. One of my first internet connection was via satellite.
I remember, because even then I used experimentally because it was monstrously expensive.
Yes.
It was, I think the company still exists, even though I think they got out of that. It was called Freya. and it was horrendous because you would measure the latency in the thousands of milliseconds.
Yes, yes. It was.
Okay, now it got better. It's not exactly 2,000 something milliseconds. It's now only 700.
Yeah, the
Still
video clip with me on an ATV in the middle of nowhere in Indiana, US. That one was edited and uploaded via satellite uplink. It took 9 hours to upload it on YouTube. Right? So it's incredibly slow, brutally expensive, but it's possible.
Yeah.
But it's possible. And the same thing goes, okay, let's take a more extreme example, North Korea. North Korea is, technically speaking, isolated from the internet. Well, not so fast.
Not really.
Not so fast. Because I was reading recently an interview given by a diplomat, a North Korean diplomat who defected with his family from the North Korean embassy in Kuwait. And the portion where the journalist was talking to his daughter was like, one of the great things that I like that we finally defected to South Korea is that I can use the internet as much as I want. Translation, she was able to use the internet from North Korea as well, with some limits, but he was able to. So yeah, not even North Korea is disconnected from the internet.
It obviously it's not disconnected because back in 2017 or 2018, Steam released a map, and you can see that the dots. Everybody had a Steam account, and there was also one suspicious dot in Pyongyang.
Right,
so even Kim Jong-un uses the internet to play his Steam games.
It's probably someone from an embassy or whatever, because I remember from a discussion with a Romanian diplomat at the Romanian embassy in Pyongyang, telling me about some of the problems he had with the party, with the Communist Party of North Korea, because he kept on forgetting the router opened, the router of the embassy opened and headed towards the street and without a password on it. And that eventually drew the ire of the party. And whatever, they had to sacrifice some low-tier personnel, saying that was it wasn't the fault of some low-tier personnel. It was very intentional. The U.S. embassy does the same thing, and most of the Western embassies do that in Pyongyang. So what I'm saying is that disconnecting a country like Russia from the global internet, it's not that it's impossible. It is possible if you really want to. Well, what's that proverb? If you really want to, you can move the mountain in a different direction. But if you're smart enough, you just walk around it, right? You leave the mountain there because it won't harm you. So if you really want to disconnect a country like Russia from the global internet, yes, it's possible, but you shouldn't do it. Now, on the Navalny movement and the protests, the Western press has been hyping up the Navalny-related protests for obvious reasons, of course. Most of the Western press is ostensibly anti-Putin, and I'm not blaming them. I'm anti-Putin as well, for different reasons than the Western press, but that's a different story. But we also have to face reality. The Navalny protests were a joke. Yes, they had the geographic spread, more than 100 cities, as Moscow Times says, but come on, last weekend, 150, maybe 200,000 people in total. With the population of Russia, that's nothing. It's really nothing. In the same weekend, more than 200,000 people had been protesting COVID restrictions in Europe. Right? Kind of same surface. Yeah. Now, admittedly, a bigger population, but still. Call me when Navalny gets in the streets 3 million people.
At least.
3 million people, Russia-wide. Get 500,000 in Moscow and another 2.5 million in all the other cities of Russia. That's when we're talking. Now, with 3 million people out in the streets, lasting for 2 days preferably, continuously, just having rolling. Yeah, that's when you get the system to be afraid of you, right? It's kind of the same thing now as in Belarus, right? In Belarus, at least in Belarus, their protests were also spectacular, which was okay. They got Lukashenko to come to the negotiating table eventually. But to get Putin at the negotiating table, get 3 million in the streets at the very least. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's a very cynical way of analyzing, basically getting more NPCs there, but that's how it works. I mean, if you want to scare a regime like this, you gotta have more people in the streets. At this point in time, I was reading, I think in The Guardian, I'm gonna put the link in the low bar, I think it was The Guardian that said the Kremlin basically shrugs off the protest movement. Some press officer of the Kremlin replying to a question by some journalist, he was saying, well, if you're referring to that particular inmate, didn't even say his name, no, we don't think it's going to be a problem, no, we don't. And they're right. With 200,000 people in the streets, maybe. Yeah, sure, it's admirable that they got through a huge crackdown by the police and still stood there in the streets. Yeah, that's admirable. I like it. Good for you. But you need more people. You really need more people. And it's very difficult to get more people because, and this is a very politically incorrect thing to say, while there is increasing discontent with Putin's regime for good reasons, there is also some support for Putin. A significant portion of the country, capital C country, they like the guy. Now, they don't like the guy enough to get out in support of him necessarily, although there was a huge flash mob in favor of Putin. It looked very North Korean. If I find the video, I'm going to put it so I can show it to you. If not, I'm going to leave the link with a copyrighted video in the low bar. But yes, there was, there are those who are willing even to protest in favor of Putin, but there are very few of those. But, I'm not saying it's a majority. It's probably not a majority of the country, but there is a significant minority in the country that actually likes the guy. And there's another problem. Navalny's propaganda is good. From a professional perspective, I'm looking, yes, it's pretty damn good. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's still unable, maybe it will be able in a few months. If they continue down this road, eventually they'll find the jackpot. But for now, it's still unable to touch the rednecks of Russia, right? You have to touch those people in the very remote rural areas, because if you don't touch those, in September there's elections for the State Duma, right, for the Russian parliament. And he wants, through his scheme of tactical voting, essentially, they call it smart voting, whatever, to basically replace as many United Russia Party MPs with some of his own or some other parties that are just not Putin's party, to fragment the parliament. It's a very smart strategy. It's definitely can work, but in order to succeed with that, you have to touch those very low-tier rural voters to at least turn up to the polls. Basically flip localities that have been consistently what do they call it in Russia? Politically apathetic, that's the term, and flip them into something else. They don't necessarily have to be pro-Navalny, but at the very least to be not apathetic. Now that's different, difficult mission. It's doable, but now with Navalny in jail, I think he was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in jail, so that means he's not getting out before mid-2022. Of course, he's not going to spend almost 3 years in jail. In a year and a half, he's out. But probably even earlier than that. But he's probably going to spend the election period in jail. Now, admittedly, he has created a very wide network of people inside Russia, so they will be able to coordinate it pretty efficiently, hopefully. But still, it's a long way ahead. And yeah. So, the Western media has been reporting with the Russian protests in a very enthusiastic way, but I'm sorry to say it's still far from enthusiastic. Yes, it's good. It hasn't been like that for a few years, and it's a step in the right direction, but far from enthusiastic. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, not to cut the enthusiasm of everybody looking outside Russia, still having to fight political apathy, considering how difficult it was to fight political apathy here in Romania. Well, not to mention Russia being both big and wide and sparsely populated. It is going to be a real challenge, and that's going to be where the decision will be made if he manages to resonate with who matters, at least for the fragmentation stage, because he I'm pretty sure if he doesn't think like that, at least the ones below him who write the propaganda to him or write it for him should think that that suddenly going for a jump to turn from being apathetic towards Putin to being pro Navalny is not going to happen, which is why why Russia has this issue that not having democratic exercise can sometimes not manage to see these natural processes going on.
Yeah, and oftentimes it's not even, of course there is also election fraud quite a lot, but not recently, not so much during parliamentary elections. I think it was 2 or 3 parliamentary elections ago when Putin's party won 80% out of a turnout of 130%.
And yeah, it was that one with 140%.
Yeah, that was pure honk. But since then, the amount of fraud wasn't that big and definitely not that bloody obvious. And that's one of the reasons why Navalny has become a little bit more open about things, because he also noticed that actually it is winnable. But yes, flattening the political apathy in a country accustomed with political apathy, particularly the cities outside of the metropolitan Russia, if you want. In those cities is very difficult. As one of the activists was saying that, she was referring to the activists in Moscow and St. Petersburg and whatnot. She was saying at least in these big cities we have safety in numbers. If we get harassed out of the workplace, we can find work easily somewhere else and whatever. But those people in the provinces, right, very far east, beyond the Ural Mountains, it's kind of difficult because the deep state is very not so deep. It's very in your face. The political apparatchik is the mayor. Political apparatchik is everyone in the local council. Political apparatchik in every single company in the town. So you can get yourself pretty exiled pretty fast if you come out as non-Putinist. You don't even have to be pro-Navalny. It's enough to be non-Putinist. It's not that it's forbidden, but it's not exactly permitted, right? It's somewhere be that odd place between forbidden and not permitted. The enthusiasm is gonna have to wait. That's what I'm saying, it's going to be a long battle. Now, luckily, Navalny is in good luck because Putin has Parkinson's. I don't think it's a secret anymore. So he will step down much faster than 2034, as it was speculated last year. Also, now that the pandemic bullshit is being flattened, including in Russia, I mean, the only reason pandemic measures still exist in Russia right now is for Putin to arrest Navalny's brother for breaching COVID-19 measures. I mean, the guy was laughing his ass off as the police were taking him away.
He was carried to the van.
Yes, because at the same time, he was arrested for breaching COVID-19 safety measures, while I think there was 20 protesters were shoved into a van and left there for 2 days because there was no room in the local the local county jail. So, I mean, come on. You can't possibly convince anyone, not even Putin's supporters, that this has anything to do with the pandemic. It doesn't, right? Not to mention that here's a point of hypocrisy for the Western media. They whined a lot about the 20,000 people that protested against Sebastian Kurz in Vienna 5 days ago, last Sunday. Whereas at the same time, they have nothing to comment about the 50,000 people that protested against Putin in Moscow. They either did not comment at all or commented to praise the protesters. Now, admittedly, Vienna is not a good example. Brussels is a better example. The way the Belgian police has treated protesters over the last 2 weeks is identical to the way Putin has been treating protesters.
Well, of course, you got the Sovietsky Soyuz, then you got the Европейский
Soyuz. Right. That's true as well. Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Can't argue with that. All right, let's take a break. Scheisse, I haven't chosen a song. I don't know. We'll be listening to something from Crimea, and then we'll be back with Africa, Asia, and Oceania.
When the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth, to kill with the sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth.
Alright, we're back. I have no idea what song I played because I committed the atrocious mistake of not picking the song before the show. Africa, COVID-19. Africa's second waves sees rising death rate. There is evidence that the death rate for those infected with COVID-19 in Africa is on the increase, and although the overall number of new cases has fallen in some countries, it remains persistently high in others, with many of these cases possibly linked to the new variants of the virus. At least 40 countries have now seen a second wave of the pandemic, including all countries in the Southern Africa region, says Africa Centers for Disease Control. This new wave of infections is thought to be associated with the emergence of variants that are more transmissible. A new variant of the virus known as 501V2 emerged from South Africa last year and has contributed to record case numbers in the Southern African region, according to the Wuhan Flu organization. Initial analysis indicates that the variant may spread more readily between people, according to the WHO. However, it does not appear to cause more serious illness. Kind of like any cough. In South Africa itself, daily new case numbers have started to fall significantly after a second peak. And because there are more cases in South Africa than anywhere else on the continent, this has resulted in an overall fall of 17% cases across the continent, according to the CDC. In Nigeria, scientists have identified a new variant, although they say there is currently no evidence to indicate that it has contributed to increased transmission necessarily. However, cases in Nigeria have been on the rise since early December and are only just started to trend downwards. The Wuhan Flu organization says twice as many people died of COVID-19 in the 4 weeks between December 29th, 2020 and January the 25th, compared with the previous 4 weeks. However, the number have started to level off. The WHO data excludes, however, Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Sudan, Djibouti, and Somalia. During the first stage of the pandemic, Africa's overall fatality rates, the proportion of those with COVID who then die, were lower than those elsewhere in the world. There were a number of theories put forward as to why that might be the case, such as the relatively younger population and possible cross-immunity from other coughs. But the Africa CDC has now warned about rising fatality rates in the continent, saying that of the 55 countries they monitor, 21 are now reporting fatality rates above the current global average of 2.2%. The fatality rate of Africa has crept up since July last year, when it was 2.1% to 2.5% currently. Now again, look at how they manipulated. These are CFR numbers, right? Case fatality rate rather than IFR, which is the only number that is really relevant. Anyway, it's worth pointing out that the global fatality rate has also come down since the start of the pandemic, which in itself would put more African countries above the global average. and fatality rates are affected by how much testing is done. A country with low levels of testing will show a higher death rate because many non-fatal cases are going undetected. More importantly, data for deaths should be treated with caution given the wide variations in how countries record them. In South Africa, research into excess data, that's the number of deaths in a certain period above what would normally be expected, shows that there were 83,918 between May 6th last year and January 5 this year. The official death toll from COVID-19 since the start of the pandemic is currently at just under 45,000 deaths. And South Africa was just one of 8 countries on the continent that the BBC found in a recent investigation had adequate death registration systems. So coronavirus deaths across Africa as a whole are likely to be under-recorded, or the measures kill more people than the virus itself. Could be. I'm just saying. Ethiopia might have some excess death due to the, military coup. Anyway. The Wuhan Honk organization says testing in Africa is still low compared to other regions, and there's also concern that irregular levels of testing over time may be masking the true spread of the virus. Now, I'm sorry, what? Oh, there is more fatality above global average. So, the same article, here's the print screen. According to the BBC, this article, right? The whole continent of Africa as of February the 1st. 3,587,844 cases and 91,078 deaths. As of February the 3rd, Spain, 2,913,389 cases and 60,370 deaths. Almost as much as the whole of Africa. And that's just Spain. If I put Italy in there, then the whole statistic goes completely insane. If I add Portugal to it as well, and maybe who else has had the big numbers? Czech Republic,
the UK,
and the United Kingdom. Yeah, Czech Republic, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Spain, and Portugal, and that's already twice as much, if not thrice as much, than the whole of Africa combined. So, I'm sorry, but please tell me more about the above global death rate from the coup in Africa. Please, give me a fucking break. Why is it so hard for the BBC and for many of these Western outlets to simply acknowledge that, because, again, this should be good news, especially if you're a progressive. Well, actually, it's good news for me as well, but, but especially if you're a progressive, this should be good news for you, right? The coup is nothing in Africa. And claiming otherwise is just lying. The coup is objectively nothing in Africa. No matter how you try to spin it, the numbers don't lie. Your own numbers, with overcounting the cases and having a very flawed way of counting the deaths and whatnot, even with your own numbers, the coup is obviously nothing in Africa.
Yeah, but man, those Africans must be negationists, and they don't do enough testing.
They're all Putinists, right?
And their mom is Putin, and their dad is 5G.
I mean, really, why can't the media report essentially good news? Why? What's the problem in acknowledging that they're in some areas of the world, though especially those that skew young, such as most of Africa, the coup is not just a cough, sometimes not even that. I mean, my de facto wife, right, just caught the coup and she didn't even cough. So, why can't this be broadcast as good news? Because it should be good news.
You know why? Because it destroys the panicard narrative that they've been pushing for nearly a year.
Well, even the panicard narrative has been flattening over the last 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's been flattened, but as we know, the leftist media, when they know they fucked it up, they double down on their fuck up, to create a monumental fuck up on the narrative front for them.
Yeah, well, it's not like they don't have experience in that. But seriously, I mean, the BBC has been pretty rational for the most part. Especially after July, up until July they were full insane. They were the least trustworthy publication when it came to anything COVID-19 related. But then since July they've become increasingly more rational, and at least they reported things in a cold manner, right? Without any value judgments. But this time they're just trying really, really hard to obscure the fact that the data from Africa shows tremendous news. Great news, the big league news, right?
Yeah, but even then, if you want to see the reason why they're so ignorant, let me just check again. What were the cases reported in South Africa alone? Let me see.
These are all the deaths.
Okay, excess deaths.
Like 1.5 million are from Africa, right? South Africa, right?
Yeah,
it doesn't say here, but it's
yeah.
on
Okay,
that
there are 1.5 million cases in South Africa. Let's remember again. South Africa is a country of 58 million people, and out of them, just a few tens of thousands died. We've said this. We said the same thing in other so far reports that we've spoken about the cough in South Africa. That is nothing at the level of country. There are more people that die of AIDS in that country than they die of the cough.
Right.
The cough is somewhere way below the priority scale or the main cause of the deaths.
Yes, and not just and South Africa is not the only one that is deeply affected by HIV complications, because that's what AIDS is, right? There are many others. Zimbabwe is also pretty in a pretty terrible situation when it comes to, again, HIV with the cough. They barely even noticed it, right? If not for the government trying to take away some of their rights again, if not for the government's reaction, nobody would have known there is a cough circulating around, right? And I think like 100 people had died of Zimbabwe of the cough-19. That's what the government says, so it's probably less than that. But okay, fair enough. Same thing with Namibia, right? Deeply decimated population with HIV, and yes, 10 people died of cough-19. Okay, whatever. So yeah, instead of broadcasting it as good news and saying, look, at least this particular global fuck-up did not affect Africa, unlike most of the other global fuck-ups, which usually disproportionately affected Africa. This time around, that's not the case. And instead of broadcasting it as fundamentally good news, they're like, oh, but they're autistic enough. And really? Why?
Yeah, and also let's talk about this this new scarecrow that appeared, and we started seeing it since December, related to
the South African variant.
Oh my God, new variants of the coronavirus. Well, let's see. When it's about viruses and about everything else, yeah, because even viruses follow natural order. You got to think of a triangle. You got in one corner, the deadliness. You got in one corner symptoms, and then you got on the other corner infectivity. When it's skewed from let's say it had a bias towards being more infectious, but not so symptomatic and even less deadly. The shift towards it being more infectious, even this article says that it's considered to be even less symptomatic than the original was, and it caused even less deaths, which is the same thing that happened with the British variant, but nobody talks about that one either.
Yes. If it becomes tamed enough, and it will, because that's what all viruses do, especially the very infectious ones. Those that tend to kill most of their hosts, like Ebola, they don't, because they rarely live long enough to become more infectious and less deadly. But of those respiratory ones, whether it's flus or coronaviruses, eventually it becomes tamed enough in terms of symptomatology and death rate, and increasingly more and more transmissible. So you'd have more caseload, but nobody showing up to the hospital, but caseloads going brr. How we would call that? Natural vaccination.
Yeah, the mythical herd immunity that everybody denies.
Oh God, I'm getting increasingly mad about this. The Wuhan Organization even modified the definition of herd immunity on their website, saying that it is only achieved by vaccines. Really, really. Yeah. I mean, the father of immunology discovered this with I think it was with smallpox or something like that. Discovered it in a village in Denmark. Basically, there wasn't, the very notion of vaccines was dubious at best at that time. It was still on the level of voodoo, so no. He noticed that a particular set of villages were keeping on using the elders to treat those who are ill, and the elders just refused to die or even get ill in the first place. And he started studying the records of the church, and turned out that most of those elders who were being used for this apparently dangerous task were kids during the previous epidemic 70 years ago or 60 years previous to the moment he was observing, and all of those were survivors of the previous epidemic. And so he postulated that something called immunity could actually be a thing, which was a major breakthrough in 1810. But here we are 210 years later, having a major infrastructure like the Wuhan Honk organization coming and say, oh, but no, there is no such thing as herd immunity. And really. Oh, and okay, if you don't like the example of Africa, how about the example of India, right? Population-wise, kind of as big as Africa. Now probably slightly smaller. Africa has been booming populationally lately, but still huge territory and with a lot of people, more crowded than Africa.
And you can't even compare the concentration with Africa. And
still marginal death rates, because you're in the area that creates almost all of the coughs in the world. So as a result, the population has natural immunity to almost all coughs from the moment they're born. So it has to be a very serious cough to defeat that pre-existent immunity. And as it turns out, this particular fluffy guy was just not strong enough to actually make the deaths go brrr. Yes, a lot of people, millions and millions and millions of people coughed very badly, but very few of them died.
Shocking.
Yeah, well... And again, this was noticed the best in India because, again, there's no such thing as social distancing in India, period. You just can't do that. There's another aspect, this whole thing of social distancing claptrap is a disease of rich countries, right? And okay, maybe Russia as well, because it's a distanced country anyway, sparsely populated. But there's no way you can afford this kind of nonsense in Malaysia or India or very, very crowded, or Japan for that matter, very crowded countries, and as it turns out, not much of a problem. So, how much longer does it have to go until you say, well, look, here's some good news? Yeah, while this coup was terrible in very old populations like Italy, it turns out it's not that terrible in very young populations or in populations located next to the epicenter of most coughs of the world, the epicenter being China. Because again, China has been producing coughs, well, maybe I should say coughs have been produced in what is today China for centuries. It's not something new. It's not, although this one in particular appears to be produced in a way that is only partially natural, if we are to believe that researcher from CERN, from Switzerland, who basically says that, yeah, this one is probably, at least in part, lab-made. Maybe it is, I don't know, but still, even a lab-made virus still follows the laws of nature, because even if you create it to be very lethal, once it spreads unchecked, it still starts following the laws of nature, because, it's not like in the movies where you create a super bug that kills everyone. That's not how reality works. It's just not. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, because speaking of the natural order, if there would be a superbug that could kill so many people, it will kill the host faster than it can spread, and it flattens itself out surprisingly, and it disappears because it no longer has any host to go on.
The grandfather of this fluffy guy, his name was severe acute respiratory syndrome.
Yeah, SARS-1 in 2003.
SARS-1, yeah, it was exactly like this. It has a contagion quotient, or R0 lower than this one. This one, when it appeared, it was 3.5 or something like that in crowded areas, and 2.8 in sparsely populated area. That one was 2.2. But it was killing people faster than it could spread, and as a result, nobody has a sample of SARS-CoV-1 today. Nobody, right? Because that was a thing in a way that they started researching for a vaccine for it then, with these kinds of proteins that Pfizer is now making billions off of. But they stopped the research because the virus disappeared before they could even begin phase 1 trials, right? So yeah, this one, however, is the nephew, the grandson of that one. This one spreads fast enough and kills almost nobody, again, statistically speaking. Recently, a French study also noticed that yes, it's more lethal than your regular coughs, regular influenza, but not 30 or 50 times more lethal, but more like 2.5 times more lethal, which again sounds terrible, but we're comparing 0.01 versus 0.02327.
Statistically irrelevant.
Yeah, it's called, when it comes to these kinds of numbers, you have to round them up or down to the nearest closest integer.
Sure, yeah.
Which in this case is... I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying. Alrighty. Cough. BBC, Myanmar coup. Let's get to my favorite cause. China blocks UN condemnation as protest grows. GM shocked. China has blocked a UN Security Council statement condemning the military coup in Myanmar. The military took over the power in the Southeast Asian nation on Monday after arresting political leader Aung San Suu Kyi and hundreds of other lawmakers. The coup leaders have since formed the Supreme Council, which will sit above the cabinet. In Myanmar's biggest city, Yangon, though, signs of resistance and civil disobedience have been growing. Doctors and medical staff in dozens of hospitals across the country are stopping work in protest against the coup and to push for Ms. Suu Kyi's release. The United Nations Security Council met on Tuesday but failed to agree on a joint statement after China did not support it. China has the power of veto as one of the 5 permanent members of the Council. Ahead of the talks, Special Envoy to Myanmar Christine Schraner strongly condemned the military takeover, which came after the army refused to accept the outcome of general elections held in November. She said it was clear that the recent outcome of the election was a landslide victory for Ms. Suu Kyi's party. In further criticism, the group of 7 major economic powers said it was deeply concerned and called for the return of democracy. Wah. We call upon the military to immediately end the state of emergency, restore power to the democratically elected government, to release all those unjustly detained, and to respect human rights and the rule of law. The statement released in London said the G7 comprises of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. All of the coughing nations. China has been warning since the coup that sanctions or international pressure would only make things worse in Myanmar. Beijing has long played a role of protecting the country from international scrutiny. It sees the country as economically important and is one of Myanmar's closest allies. Alongside Russia, it has repeatedly protected Myanmar from criticism at the UN over the military crackdown on the Muslim minority in Rohingya population. Beijing's stance on the situation is consistent with its overall skepticism of international intervention, Sebastian Strangio, author and Southeast Asia editor at The Diplomat, told the British Brainwash Corporation. While China does benefit strategically from Myanmar's alienation from the West, this does not mean that Beijing is happy with the coup, he cautions. They had a pretty good arrangement with the NLD and invested a lot to build a relationship with Aung San Suu Kyi. The return of the military actually means that China now has to deal with the institution in Myanmar that historically is the most suspicious of China's intentions. Through this foreign policy equivalent of gaslighting, China seems to be signaling its tacit support, if not emphatic endorsement, for the general's actions. Myanmar expert Elliot Pross-Freeman of the National University of Singapore told the BBC. China seems to be proceeding as if it's Myanmar's internal issue, in which what we are observing is a cabinet reshuffle, as China's state media put it. While he thinks a UN statement would not have made an immediate difference, it would still serve as a first step for cohering an international response that appears to not be forthcoming. Aung San Suu Kyi, who led the now ousted elected government, has not been seen since she was detained by the military on Monday morning. Dozens of others also remain detained, including President Win Myint, members of her party's Central Committee, and her personal attorney. They are reportedly being held under house arrest. Her National League for Democracy demanded her immediate release on Tuesday. It has also called upon the military to accept the results of the November election, which saw the NLD win more than 80% of the votes. Meanwhile, the United States said it had been unsuccessful in contacting the Myanmar military and has formally declared the takeover to be a coup d'etat. This means the US cannot directly assist the government, though most of its assistance goes to non-governmental entities. The Eurosayuz, the United Kingdom, Australia, and others have also condemned the takeover. Myanmar, also known as Burma, was ruled by armed forces until 2011, when a nominally civilian government was sworn in. Power has been handed over to Commander-in-Chief Min Aung Hlaing. 11 ministers and deputies, including those of finance, health, and the interior and foreign affairs, were replaced. In the first meeting meeting of his cabinet on Tuesday, Min Aung Hlaing repeated that the takeover had been inevitable. The country was calm in the aftermath of the coup, with troops patrolling all major cities and a nighttime curfew in force. Myanmar has a long history of military rule, and many people can still remember the terror of previous coups. But on Tuesday evening, car horns and the beginning of cooking pots could be heard in the streets of Yangon in a sign of protest. Activist groups have called for civil disobedience campaign, setting up a Facebook group to organize their efforts. Staff at 70 hospitals and medical departments across the country have reportedly stepped away from all non-emergency work. Hundreds of healthcare workers, including senior doctors, have participated in the Red Ribbon movement, with many donning a red ribbon on their clothes to show they were against it. Online, many changed their social media profiles to pictures of just the color red. Some medics have also been wearing symbols like black ribbons in silent protest. Yeah, okay, that's gonna help. Not. But now look up for something called the Burmese way to socialism. Okay, look that up on Google. There is a very nice study on it, an academic paper on it. I don't know if I would be breaking copyright. It's written in 1963. And it's a good analysis about how this whole mess started. It started basically in 59 or 60, something like that. So no, it's not a new mess. It's over 60 years old, what I'm saying. And in 1963, a certain politologist wrote a very good paper. It's very brief, it's like 20 pages long. What you need to know about Burma, right? It reads like it was written yesterday. All right. Nothing, absolutely nothing changed. I contacted a few people, Romanians that I know that either lived in Myanmar, and as it turns out, one of them still lives there. He then also gave an interview for the mainstream Romanian media, and you know, what I was expecting to hear, I got it confirmed from the people who live there. Indeed, nothing has changed since 2011, and in 2011 the situation was just like in 1960, right? Admittedly, nominally civil, even the BBC says nominally civilian government, but the point is that you know, Miss Sun Kyi did not necessarily change anything fundamentally. The process of democratization of the country was going not just slow, but extremely slow, right? In ways that you did not see in, I mean, even Vietnam was making more democratic progress than Myanmar, and Vietnam is still nominally ruled by the Communist Party, right? With a population that is 95% capitalistic, which is a lot more than Germany can brag about. Anyway, the point is that nobody in the media, either the official media or the alternative media, seems to be willing to notice the fact that, you know, communism and military rule have been inextricable to Myanmar/Burma for decades. I mean, yeah, I can understand why the BBC doesn't do that, but I haven't seen any reference to the Burmese way to socialism, even in the alternative media. I mean, why? Why is this so taboo to talk about, you know, the fucking commies? Because that's what it is. Now, admittedly, less Chinese-friendly communism, because that's why I picked the BBC article, because they do mention that it's not necessarily an end of the world for China, but it's not something that they necessarily wished for. I mean, from Beijing's perspective, this is a step slightly backwards, because now, admittedly, they can also do what do you call it? Experience exchanges. The Burmese military has a lot of experience on how to deal with Muslim minorities. The CCP also has a lot of experience on how to deal with Muslim minorities. So, you know, they can exchange experience, you know, maybe get some training facilities in Xinjiang for the Burmese military. Now, you know, and I'm not joking. I mean, I'm not saying this with any joy, but also I'm not joking in the sense that I suspect this will happen, because that would be probably the only way that the CCP would find, again, assuming that this regime would last, which is very debatable. But assuming that this regime would last, that would be the first point of approach, and they would find some common ground with the CCP, because otherwise it is true, the Myanmar military is very skeptical of the CCP. Almost always, and I can't blame them. I mean, again, anyone next to China is skeptical of the CCP, and again, you can't blame them. I mean, more recently, even Kim Jong-un has become slightly skeptical of the CCP.
Yeah,
So,
the Myanmar doesn't want to become part of the Zhongguo Soyuz.
right.
But even then, the reason why this also gets so much traction in the media was because Aung San Suu Kyi was supported a lot back when she was still in exile, and during the time of the election, but particularly during the election time back in 2011 when she got back, she was supported a lot by people like Obama, by Biden, and a lot of Democrats.
Yes, it was the West's bet on democracy in Myanmar, and up until about 2018-ish, when you would question not necessarily the motives, but you just question the results of this Democrat globalist movement, whatever, pushes for democracy, nation building, all of that, right? Whenever you would question, okay, what are your results? Okay, I get your intentions. Let's assume your intentions are pure. What are your results? Myanmar would be one of the first examples that any globalist shill would come up with and say, look, here's the biggest progress, which is one of the reasons why when I started studying this, Myanmar was one of the first countries I went to, because I was like, okay, let's explore. I didn't have Freedom Alternative at the time, and I don't think I even have, I think I have one or two pictures with me, and that's pretty much it. But you know, I went there, let's see what are the results, and let's just say that I wasn't impressed. You know, another 10 years have passed since then. I'm still not impressed, and reading the media, I'm like, maybe it doesn't work. Now, admittedly, Aung San Suu Kyi also got, just like Obama, got the Nobel Peace Prize, and you know, she has had a good life among the so-called Western elites. So as a result, of course, the Western media invested a lot in her. Now, admittedly, her relationship with the West had gone sour, I think since 2015, 2016, something like that, because of the Rohingya issue. Now, if I recall correctly, please correct me if I'm wrong, the Rohingyas are Muslims, but of, I think, Indian background, right?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Admittedly, it's a very weird population that technically shouldn't be there, but they are, and it's, I think nobody even knows how they got there, but technically speaking, it's not like the situation in Xinjiang in China, where they basically, you know, they border Kazakhstan, and yes, some Kazakhs happen to be on the wrong side of the border. But with Rohingya, it's a little bit more difficult because they're just too far away from what could be considered their home country.
Not exactly. The origin has been traced to the current nation of Bangladesh, which is why Bangladesh was one of the very first countries to become really upset when the Rohingya cleanup began.
Yes, and soon enough, diplomatically speaking, India also got involved, understandably so. I mean, again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm not saying it's a good thing either, because you know, the Rohingya situation is one of those scandals that was really swept under the rug. And you know, Sun Kyi, the great Nobel Peace Prize laureate and the West's darling, literally, was one of the people who helped put the swept the situation under the rug in a way that turned out to be more efficient than the CCP's attempt to sweep Xinjiang under the rug. Apparently it doesn't work with Xinjiang, but it worked with Rohingya. Yeah. And yeah, you know, so you know, her situation is very delicate now, because yes, she used to be the darling of the West, but not anymore, and this coup d'etat comes in a very delicate moment when the whole of the media you know, piles on China for the Xinjiang issue. Correctly so. What's happening in Xinjiang is atrocious, is a terrible situation indeed. And, you know, she comes like, oh, yelp, the military is being mean to me. Yeah, but how did you treat it? Oh, okay. Shit. Right. So the Western media is now in a terrible situation because, yeah, they can say military man bad, but then again, who helped the military sweep the Rohingya cleanup under the rug? Well, it's the person against whom the coup d'etat had just happened. So, you know, it's very difficult to construct a narrative that one of these sides is the good guys here. There are no good sides in this story. It's not even like in Ethiopia where you can construct a narrative for both sides in a way. Also with a Nobel Peace Prize laureate, by the way. But at least in Ethiopia you can say, yeah, well, but Tigray kinda man bad, and you know they got weapons from the Wuhan Honk organization via what's his name, Tedros Ghebreyesus, right? So at least there you can somewhat understand why the federal government of Ethiopia had been doing what they've been doing. So you can construct a narrative. It's a debatable situation. Here it's much more complicated. Who are the good guys? Well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I would bury all of these people alive underneath the jail. But of course, the Burmese people disagree. I mean, they voted 80% for this lady, and I'm sure the elections were fair. But the thing is that it's a very complicated situation. You know, heads, China wins, tails, everyone else loses, right? I mean, that's kind of what the situation is. From China's perspective, democracy is preferable, right? Because the CCP has better relations with the Sun Chi and the so-called democratic regime. From the West's perspective, again, democracy is preferable because Burmese military man bad and Islamophobic military saw, right? And of course the corruption man bad because again the military regime. That's why I'm saying that it's very questionable whether the regime would last because they're just incompetent at dealing with the economy. That's the main reason why everyone agreed, including the military itself, to step down from power 10 years ago because they're like, we just can't into economics. Because, you know, not everyone can be Pinochet. And by the way, Pinochet couldn't into economics either. He just admitted outright that he has no idea what he's doing on economics and just invited the people who know how to economics, right? But, you know, Asian militaries are not that enlightened, I guess, to just basically say, look, we're going to rule with an iron fist on this sector where we know how to rule, but, you know, on things that we don't know, let's invite people that know.
Yeah, complicated situation, but at the same time, not exactly a nothing burger, but not far off.
Admittedly, most of them, I mean, you know, in the Romanian media, it was treated like a nothing burger. I mean, the only reason people even learned about it is because there was that funny video with the lady recording her aerobics class.
Well, the aerobics where all the tanks were going on the highway.
Yeah. So, you know, it's quite bad luck for Miss Sun Chi because the only way the world learned about it is through a meme aerobics class. So, you know, good luck getting anyone in the public opinion anywhere, not just in the West, to give a damn. I mean, you know, you're the lady with the aerobics class where your regime was falling. Yeah, okay, fair enough. You know, meme regime. Meme stocks, meme regime. This whole world is turning into a honk meme. Speaking of honk memes, CNN... there you go. I did include it in the end. Kim Jong-un cannot denuclearize, former North Korean diplomat says. North Korea's former acting ambassador to Kuwait believes Kim Jong-un will not give up his nuclear arsenal, but may be willing to negotiate an arms reduction for relief from the international sanctions crippling Pyongyang's economy. In his first interview since defected to the South more than a year ago, Ryu Hyun-woo told the CNN that North Korea's nuclear power is directly linked to the stability of the regime, and Kim likely believes nuclear weapons are key to his survival. Ryu also said previous US administrations had boxed themselves into a corner by demanding denuclearization up front in negotiations with the totalitarian state. The US can't back down from denuclearization, and Kim Jong-un cannot denuclearize, he added. The former diplomat, who adopted the name Ryu upon moving up to the South, is one of the several high-ranking North Korean officials to defect in recent years. The country's top diplomat in Italy fled to South Korea in 2019. Tai Young-ho, the former deputy ambassador to the United Kingdom, defected in 2016. Tai has since been elected to South Korea's National Assembly. Ryu and his family defected to South Korea in September 2019, but their actions were only made public last week. Determined to give their teenage daughter a better life, Ryu said he and his wife planned their escape for about a month while living in Kuwait. Ryu said that if they had been caught, North Korean agents would have quickly taken them all back to Pyongyang for certain punishment, as defection is considered a major embarrassment to the Kim regime and is not taken lightly. Ryu and his wife both came from North Korea's ruling elite. His father-in-law ran Office 39, a branch of the North Korean government, a former employee likened to a slush fund of the Kim family. Nominally, it is in charge of getting hard currency for the cash-strapped regime. North Korea has long been accused of using its embassies as cash cows for the ruling Kim family. Ryu said that while he was a trained diplomat dealing with politics, there was also economic trading workers assigned to diplomatic posts. They were given a quota on the amount of money they must make for the state, Ryu added. Kuwait was a particularly important revenue stream for Pyongyang, as the Persian Gulf nation used to employ about 10,000 North Korean laborers. Those workers were allegedly treated like modern-day slaves, and experts say almost all of their earnings were funneled back to the government, paying for Kim regime priorities such as the nuclear program. Ryu said only China and Russia were bigger cash earners for the regime from North Korean laborers than the Gulf nations of Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, at least until 2017, when the United Nations punished Pyongyang for its repeated missile and nuclear tests by barring nations from employing its workers. Due to the UN resolution, most laborers in the Gulf region left, he said. Ryu was also posted to Syria, a close ally of North Korea, from 2010 to 2013. While Ryu was charged with overseeing relations with Syrian politicians, his countrymen were selling conventional weapons to Bashar al-Assad, including long-range multiple launcher artillery and anti-aircraft weapon systems. However, Ryu said the country's bloody civil war forced Pyongyang to pull its personnel from the country. He said he had not heard of any new weapons deals with the Syrians since leaving the country. Ryu's experience in the Middle East gave him an up-close look at how the United States dealt with Iran's nuclear program during former President Barack Obama. He believes that experience will come in handy to Cho Bai Den. Based on his experience resolving the Iranian nuclear issue, I have no doubt he'll be able to handle North Korea's nuclear issue wisely. Ryu said, "You're in for a big surprise, Mr. Ryu." He said he believed North Korea may be willing to negotiate a reduction in its nuclear weapons, but is unlikely to give them up entirely. However, he said sanctions may have played a factor in pushing North Korea to the negotiating table in 2018, when Kim and former President Donald Trump met for their historic summit in Singapore. Many analysts believe Kim came to the negotiating table because he had already developed nuclear weapons and successfully tested a long-range missile that could reach the United States territory. The current sanctions on North Korea are unprecedented and strong. I think those sanctions should continue. Ryu also said it is important not to abandon the issue of human rights, which was largely swept under the carpet during nuclear talks with the Trump administration. Human rights is a matter of morality, and in the North Korean regime, the human rights issue is a sensitive and serious one, Ryu said. Now, allow me to be skeptical of this last claim by the former diplomat. Everything else that he said is pretty much on point and consistent with other analysis and other testimonials of other members of the ruling elite. There were more than 3. I mean, CNN seems to be behind with the news here. Or maybe I'm too much ahead of the curve. I mean, that could be the case. As I'm sure, I think I've said multiple times, I'm taking my North Korean news from a Russian language forum full of dissidents and other escapees of the regime, and also other people who go into the country to sell propaganda and whatnot. So, you know, it's a very select club. It's, I think, the only intelligence operation, really, that is entirely private dealing with North Korea. You know, there are many others, of course, across the world, but with North Korea, there's only one that I'm aware of. Maybe there are others, even more discreet. But what I'm saying is that this particular last one with the human rights being sensitive and serious, well, serious from our perspective, yes, but is it sensitive really for the Kim family? I don't know. He's the first one that I'm hearing saying that. I mean, all of the rest of the testimonials are exactly in the opposite direction. So I'm not convinced.
It all depends on the perspective, because what I was looking into recently was that the event of Otto Warmbier and the way he ended up, that casts a pretty negative image on how North Korea was perceived from that human rights perspective. Well, because they didn't exactly admit that that they drugged him up in order to get God knows what from him, because he was still a fucking student at the end of the day.
At the marginal university.
But even then, what was actually surprising, and that's what the doctor that flew to North Korea to actually check on him said that well, the medical side was pretty cooperative. It's just that they were so much in the dark, just as much as he was, as to what exactly happened to him, that he got in that situation. And the way he ended up going to the US and dying a few weeks later.
Right. Now, admittedly, that might have cost the regime quite a lot. If I recall from that time, even the Globalist Times, which is the Global Times, which is the CCP's tabloid, even the Globalist Times was like, yeah, we ain't touching that. Yeah, that's kind of your fuck up, Mr. Kim. I mean, really? I mean, really? Just, random kids from U.S. universities? Really? Even we treat them better. Yeah. So I guess it cost a little bit. I remember at the time that China was, even China placed a few sanctions on the North Korean regime. Admittedly, they lasted only for a few months, but for North Korea, a few months can be
can mean an eternity and a lot of lost money.
Yes, considering that the regime is indeed cash strapped. But even so, I find it very difficult to believe that the inner circle, Kim's inner circle, and the upper echelons of the party, they really see human rights as necessarily an issue. It's very difficult, because it's usually the middle management, the middle management, who tend to have at least in part access to Western ideas. I can believe that some of those regard the human rights as a serious issue, in the sense that they might realize that they're treating their own people kind of terribly. Okay, but I don't think it is for the whole regime. Or maybe there has been a change of mind. Again, Mr. Ryu at least has more updated information. He was part of the ruling elite all the way up to September 2019, so that's pretty fresh information. At this stage, the standard you apply to North Korea is like a year and a half, 2 years. That's new, right? Because it's a very how do they call it in international set? The Hermit Kingdom? The
Hermit Kingdom, yeah.
Right. So it's not nowhere near that hermetic as it presents itself, but yes, it is pretty tight. I don't know. It seems like a slow motion car crash or slow motion train crash. Since I think it was 2010 or 2011 or maybe 2012. Something like that. It's less than, well, actually, no, more even sooner than that, 2014, something like that. Things have started going really terribly for the regime. And not in, because, they've been through harsher economic times, like the Arduous March, that's how it's called inside North Korea. We just call it the North Korean famine. From 92 to 95, I think, where like 70% of the population
it was somewhere after the collapse of the Soviet Union, because you couldn't adapt to the fact that the Soviet Union was no longer supplying them with...
well, the Soviet Union had ceased to exist in 92, right? And modern Russia, Yeltsin had bigger problems. Definitely supporting North Korea was not in the top 1,000 priorities, right? For a bloody good reason. I mean, Yeltsin has done many terrible things in Russia, but this one was not a terrible action. In fact, it was a very sensible action to take, saying to, what was it? I think it was Kim Il-sung was still alive, because he died in 94. The founder of the country said, "Pal, no shekels get lost. But what I'm saying is that that situation was a lot worse economically speaking than anything nowadays in North Korea. But at that time, the confidence within the regime, inside of the country, was also maybe not at an all-time high, but definitely much higher than now. Today, however, the ruling elite has come to just want more for itself, but also come to the realization that you can't get more for yourself within the constraints of the current regime. We've seen this movie before. We've seen this movie before. We've seen it in our own country. We've seen it in Hungary to a certain extent. We've seen it in Albania for sure. We've seen this movie before, right? When the apparatus, the members of the apparatchiks, the top tier apparatchiks, realize that if they want more for themselves, they just simply have to change the system. Now, changing the system in North Korea turns out to be much more difficult than in other places because, well, the experience with other places is still with European populations where enough people had memories about how things were before communism, which is not the case in North Korea. And yeah, and this one, I hope I don't get not copyright strike, but community strike on YouTube for saying this. But Asian populations are more docile and more collectivistic. It just is what it is. I mean, and that's why Western-style capitalist systems rarely make a dent in that portion of the world. I mean, the starring examples are what? South Korea, which is under U.S. occupation, Japan, whose founding document is written by the United States, right?
By General MacArthur, of all people,
right? And Singapore, which is a fascist dictatorship with a free economy, but a dictatorship at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, even back when, before the European involvement, when free enterprise, particularly during the spice trade, was going on, well, Portugal didn't have a lot of influence, but still, the entities like what was Singapore back then, it was still controlled by a king.
Yes. So as a result, it turns out to be a lot more difficult, unless South Korea is willing to contribute financially, and by contribute I mean contribute a lot. You think integrating the DDR into the wider Bundesrepublik was expensive? No, that was cheap. That was cheap.
Integrating North Korea into the whole Korea is gonna be monstrously expensive.
Yes, and it's a process that it's. I mean, there would have to be an agreement amongst the entirety of the political class. For the next 40 years, we're gonna work on this.
Yeah, and even then, not a lot is going to change because
of course not.
Because as we can see that even at a cultural level,
yes.
Okay, things have gotten slightly more docile in the former DDR, but the people, it's gonna take 2 generations at the very least.
Oh yes, and again, the differences between the DDR and the Deutsches Bundesrepublik were nowhere near as striking as they are between the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, right? The differences between them are just on different planets, god damn it. But still, even so, as of 2014-ish, it has gotten into this spiral of a slow train crash, right? Increasingly, members of the elite are defecting. Increasingly, more courageous reports are coming out. On dissidents forums, you get like top-tier apparatchiks leaking things with their names attached to them. They're like, fuck it, I don't care anymore. And things like Western TV crews go there and say, oh, what is that? Well, that's a market. Well, aren't those haram? Well, yeah, but they're not, because food is good. And that you get officials admitting that on tape, which in 2010 would have gotten you shot. In 2020, be like, well.
Not only get shot, but you get shot, and your entire family gets into the gulag.
Yeah, that no longer happens now, right? And the enforcement of many of the insanities of the regime just stopped because the deep state underneath Kim Jong-un be like, you know what, fuck it.
Yeah, I also remember exactly. I think we read the same report in 2014 that the apparatchiks from the North Korean ruling elite have looked not exactly over the border, but looked at how not exactly the approaches from other countries, but the middle class from even our country, and they seem that shit, we're actually having pretty bad, and we're supposed to be in control of this country.
Yeah,
at that point they were equivalent to the lower middle class of Eastern Europe, and that's saying something.
Yeah, and now they're even lower than that, because I remember the conversation talked about between Adeline Petrescu and that was in 2015, I think, or 16. When did he go to make that report? Of course, he got banned from North Korea after that report. As a wartime journalist from Romania, he usually does reports from war zones, and he had been trying for 20 years to get a visa to North Korea. Eventually, he got it in 2015. And he made two. Out of that, there was one 15-minute report called "North Korea: Nothing to Envy," and a book called "The Country with One Fat Man," and with Kim Jong-un on the cover. Needless to say, he got banned forever in North Korea. And he was talking in an interview, subsequent interview to his visit. He was talking about his conversation with the guide, the minder that was given to him when he arrived there. It was a guy who had lived in Romania a decade before or something like that. And the conversation was always like, oh, and how's Bucharest lately? Oh, and that was changed. He carried a few pictures from recent pictures from Bucharest, and from places that Petrescu would consider to be terrible, but they were still much better than most of Pyongyang. So that's the difference, yes. Nowadays, many of the top-tier apparatchiks, they would be probably lower middle class in Ukraine.
At least the lower middle class in Ukraine can afford to get a car.
Yes, yes.
While
admittedly an older one, but of Russian provenience, but still,
but to be a North Korean apparatchik with all the strings that you can pull, you still have to go through the debacle of you must have contacts in China mostly in order to get one, plus that's very expensive because more sanctions, and you also need to shelter yourself from other apparatchiks who will also look envious at you that you probably get a nicer car than they do, and you got to protect yourself from being to post an autocritical message at the next Congress for being a dirty capitalist.
For being a capitalist pig, right. I've seen the footage with what kind of cars the party is using in North Korea. I'm not impressed. And the footage was from 2020, I think. It was January or February 2020. Highly unimpressive. I think a county council vice president in this country probably drives better cars from a poor county. Whatever. Thing is that following North Korea is with the power of the decade. You have to look always, when you hear something new from North Korea, just put it in the context of the last 10 years, and then it becomes more spectacular. Admittedly, North Korea is an autistic endeavor, and it's probably a reason why it is an interest only in Eastern Europe. I mean, because we can predict what's going to happen next, and almost always get it right. We get the timeline wrong, but the order of events, it's always correct. Any random Eastern European can predict to you what's the next step. I remember when another Eastern European journalist, I think it was from Poland, went on to take an interview with that kid who escaped from a concentration camp and walked into China, and then basically got himself somehow all the way to Thailand or something, and that's how he defected to South Korea. And after about 10 minutes of the interview, the kid was like, "Oh, finally someone that understands what I'm talking about." Right. All right, since we're in the Korean Peninsula, Japan Times, but about South Korea. South Korea wants pandemic winners to share profits with hard-hit firms. This headline makes no sense in North Korea. That's what I'm saying about the difference between, right? Okay. South Korean President Moon Jae-in is calling on the corporate winners of the pandemic to share some of their profits with smaller businesses that have borne the brunt of the economic pain, as he looks to address the uneven nature of the recovery. The idea has gained traction within the ruling party in recent weeks as the K-shaped nature of the recovery has become clearer, with unprecedented public spending still failing to offset losses by mom-and-pop stores hit by social distancing restrictions. And this is in South Korea, where there were no restrictions by Europe standards. Right? So yeah, get ready for this discussion in Europe. It's going to be bloody in comparison to the one taking place in Seoul. While public support for Moon's government partly depends on its continued efforts to tackle simmering resentment over inequality in South Korea's economy, critics of the profit-sharing drive say it's tantamount to corporate bullying. Business lobbies, economists, and market analysts say it would distort key incentives in the corporate world and reduce South Korean firms' attractiveness for investors. It's kind of a fair point. Korea already has a major inequality problem, and the pandemic is by all accounts exacerbating this gap, said Kyle Ferrier, Director of Academic Affairs at the Korea Economic Institute of America. The new reality in South Korea and elsewhere looks like big business will increasingly be expected to help do its part or lessen or reverse current inequality trends. The profit-spreading proposal aims to set legal grounds for larger companies to voluntarily contribute to a fund that can be used to help smaller, vulnerable firms in times of crisis. Advocates suggest offering companies tax incentives to chip into the fund. With the main details of the proposal still up in the air, it isn't possible to pinpoint how the burden might fall on South Korea's big companies or specific impacts the measures might have, nor is it clear which companies would be expected to contribute or how much. The plan would form a part of a set of social solidarity bills pushed by the ruling party to enter legislation this year. The package also includes a proposal to allow the government to compensate small merchants for losses in payouts that would push fiscal debts level even higher. In comments delivered at the online at the World Economic Forum's Davos agenda last week, Moon promoted both the profit-sharing idea and government compensation plans as part of his inclusive growth strategy. If actualized, it would be an inclusive policy model that could help beat a new epidemic disaster like the cough in the future, Moon said. When a similar proposal was made in 2011, then Samsung patriarch Lee Kun-hee questioned its link to socialist or communist ideals. But the idea is getting more traction this time around and has higher odds of being signed into law, with the ruling party enjoying a majority in the National Assembly. The political stakes on whether such bills pass are also high. South Korea holds mayoral elections in April for Seoul and Busan, two of the nation's largest cities, and the results will set the tone for next year's presidential vote. Businesses with a large online presence have generally outperformed others reliant on brick-and-mortar operations during the COVID-19 crisis. Companies including Korea's largest messenger app operator Kakao Corp and global virus test kit distributor Seegene are among those whose earnings have ballooned since the start of the pandemic. Samsung Electronic Corporation and the world's biggest maker of memory chips also saw its profits rise last year as consumers scrambled to buy devices to work and study from home. At the other end of the spectrum, a survey of 1,006 small companies by the Korea Federation of Small and Medium-Sized Enterprises last quarter showed their average monthly sales had dropped by around a quarter, while profits slumped by more than a third since the virus hit. Still, big business isn't on board. While the contributions would be voluntary, the Federation of Korean Industries said last month it would hurt shareholders' rights, reduce companies' incentives to innovate and grow, and distort competition, since contributions would most likely be expected from Korean businesses, but not international firms like Netflix. In general, state intervention to change the incentive structure of firms is negative for operating efficiency and equity valuation, said Rory Green, an economist at TS Lombard. The country's largest firms already trade at a Korea discount relative to international peers, largely due to opaque corporate governance. Adding profit-sharing pressure or obligations will mean a deeper discount and lower valuations. Not really convinced by the last argument, really. With the Korea discount, I'm not really convinced. That doesn't seem to be that immediately obvious on the stock market, because I presume that's what he refers to. I'm not particularly convinced by that one. On the other hand, it is true, the state, Seoul can only mandate this to Korean companies. It cannot really mandate it to Facebook or Netflix or whatever. Although Netflix I don't think is really that huge, but whatever. Okay, fair enough. Now, the problem is that it's the whole concept is starting from the wrong premise. The premise being that the virus is the problem. No, the virus is not the main problem. Yes, but the virus can be a problem sometimes. Yeah, sure. You know, your employees might cough and your operations might be disrupted and whatnot. Yeah, that's kind of terrible. But the problem is the government. Right? As again, Ronald Reagan said 60 years ago, almost 60 years, 57 years ago, the solution, the government is not part of the solution to this problem. The government is the problem. It's still true 57 years later. You know, Reagan has been dead for almost 30 now, but it's still true. The government is the problem. And again, this is a situation in a country where there haven't been really restrictions. You know, if we use the European standards, let's not forget the Chinese standard, but let's use the European standard. You know, they basically had no restrictions, right? And it's already that terrible now.
Yeah, we can extrapolate if it was that terrible in South Korea, where you had yeah, indeed, you had what you didn't exactly have in Europe because it was terrible. You had contact tracing. And they actually imposed social distancing, but you didn't impose nationwide lockdowns like a country is doing now for its third time.
A certain country.
A certain country. So if with basically no, close to none, realistically, measures against the virus, well, and the profits drop by a third. Well, if that's the case, and in the case of Europe, the profits will be in the negative territory.
Yeah, I'm looking forward for this conversation because it's coming to Europe, whether you like it or not. It's going
to come with Q1.
Yeah, it's coming either in April after the figures for Q1 are published, or at the latest in July after Q2, right? But the conversation is coming to Europe. And it's going to be particularly funny to watch it in London, in Rome, in Madrid, and in Paris.
And in Lisbon too.
And in Lisbon, yes. Not so much in Berlin, not so much in Eastern Europe, because Eastern Europe, you know, has kind of flattened, the people have flattened the whole insanity. Yeah, a little bit in Prague, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, they have flattened it, but one of the negative aspects of in the European Union that Germany is pretty much the economic overlord is that the rest of the countries which are dependent on exporting to Germany will be hit particularly hard. And as just simply as a collateral victim, not because they did something bad about it. Already Sweden is reporting a slight downturn of around 4%, if I reckon, and they did absolutely nothing. So they're just purely a collateral victim of everything that happened around.
Yeah, but even so, still Sweden is still faring much better. Both in terms of economics and in terms of the virus, really. I mean, you know, Sweden is neighboring Romania in terms of you know, deaths and cases per million and things of that nature. Just saying. And by the way, that's still better than Britain and Belgium and Italy and but yeah, this kind of thing of using a scheme, because that's basically what he means, right? The president of South Korea. Let's create a scheme to take as much shekel as possibly from you know, things like LG and whatnot, and LG is South Korean.
Yeah,
it is, right?
South Korean. Yeah.
Basically make it take from big business, big tech, big whatever, and give it to small businesses, right? The problem is that the devil is always in the detail. It's a very naive way of thinking, and I'm putting it at least in part on naivete, and part of it, of course, on the Great Reset agenda. But most of it is naivete, right? I mean, the idea of, okay, but we have to help these people because we, the government, fucked it up, and they're aware of that. Of course they are. They're not going to say it in public, of course, because they have elections next year. But they're aware of that, and they're like, well, we got to fix it somehow. Okay, maybe not perfectly, but got to do something, because that's the mentality, not just of bureaucrats and governments, but also of most of the people, most of the electorate, things like that. The state should be doing something, especially true in South Korea, definitely. The problem is that the state doesn't have many tools, and it shouldn't have many tools, and no matter what the state does, it's probably going to be wrong. I mean, I've spent about an hour last night thinking about what could be a better trade-off. Of course, there are no solutions, but maybe there is a better trade-off. I got nothing. I really got nothing. That's why I put the article in the document without any comments, because I got nothing. I mean, I was trying to come up with something smart, but there's nothing. Just leave them alone, and they'll be fine. Yeah, sure, it's going to be some pain, there's going to be some bankruptcies, of course, and it's going to be your fault, the government, sure. But it's still better if you do nothing from now on, henceforth.
Yeah, so they can't go the EU way of just or the EU or the US way of just offering free money to people because they don't have the capital for that.
With the debt to GDP levels of South Korea, I don't think they can afford it.
No, but at the same time, they also can't afford to do nothing because yeah, it's gonna bite them in the ass. So this one was the sort of middle road solution of yeah, we're going to invite businesses to invest voluntarily in favor of tax credits, just to at least take some heat off us. But yeah. And pretty much each solution has its own trade-offs. One you can't do because you don't have money, and the other one is that's going to cost you in elections. And the middle road is terrible from its own point of view. Being voluntary, it could simply be just the businesses not participating at all.
Yeah, because in South Korea, I'm sure many of you know, but if you don't, learn that in South Korea, big businesses in this particular are basically empires. They're ruled hereditary. They're not ruled, even this article mentions the opaque corporate governance, and this is the Japan Times writing. You know, Japan also has a very opaque corporate governance, but it's very transparent in comparison with what happens in South Korea. In South Korea, it's entirely opaque because it's basically ruled like a royal, like a fiefdom. I'm serious. That's how they are ruled.
And you got a Samsung shogunate right there, which has everything from microwaves up to tanks. then you got to some extent the samurai kingdom of LG, who doesn't involve itself in so many, but it's more concentrated on consumers stuff.
Yeah, I mean, even this article called the Samsung patriarch. It's not meant to be insulting or as a joke.
No, it's the reality.
It's exactly how it functioned. Especially the founder. Yes, he was the patriarch. His word was the law in the entirety of the global empire. What that Samsung was and is, right? So yeah, basically 3 or 4 of these people, the heads of the big businesses in South Korea say, yeah, no. Then what? Tax them more? No, you won't do that. Because they can literally buy off your regime. Right? So you can't do that either. I don't know, ferment some protests? Yeah, sure, that could be done. There are a lot of South Korean voters who are pissed off at the so-called inequality in South Korea. Okay, fair enough. But what if those protests then suddenly become red-pilled and realize that the government is at fault? Then what? I mean, I wouldn't want to be president of South Korea in this situation. But again, if I were the president of South Korea, I would just say, you know what, all measures are henceforth flattened. Good luck coughing. We have some hospitals, we have some testing available if you think it's necessary. But you know what, go ahead. Go ahead and grow the economy back. I don't know how. But basically flat out admit, I don't know how, but you guys know better. And yeah, that would cost him some percentages in the election, but I would wager that it would be something less than. Because in South Korea, admitting failure is not seen as ungodly haram as it is in Japan.
Yeah.
Right? It is more understood as, well, at least they admitted their failures, right? That's the same thing with the previous presidents who ended up in jail for corruption. Some of them got lighter sentences because they admitted, and the public was more willing to, not necessarily to forgive, but at least understand, right? So, an acting president going in this direction, yes, it would be peculiar and weird by South Korean standards, because most politicians don't do that anywhere in the world, and especially not in South Korea. But I think that's the best trade-off.
Yeah, you rather lose the battle rather than lose the entire war.
Right.
It's exactly Sun Tzu's wisdom from not exactly South Korea, but from that area of Asia.
Yeah, and if it's been good enough for us in Sun Tzu's times, maybe it could be good enough now. It's been around for several thousands of years. Probably it has passed the test of time. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move further southeast. It will be Oceania. Reuters. Oh, goodness me! Why did I put this piece of news in? Reuters: 2 million Australians in lockdown after one coronavirus case found. About 2 million Australians began their first full day of a strict coronavirus lockdown on Monday following the discovery of one case in the community in Perth, capital of Western Australia state, but no new cases have since been found. Authorities ordered a 5-day lockdown of Perth after a security guard at the hotel used to quarantine people returning from overseas was found to have contracted the virus. The state government said 66 people have been deemed close contacts of the unidentified guard, and none of those already tested were infected. In total, 13 close contacts have now tested negative, and of those, 11 high-risk contacts have been moved into hotel quarantine as an extra precaution, Western Australia State Premier Mark McGowan told reporters in Perth. Tests on the rest of the close contacts were expected to be completed by Monday. Update, none of them is coughing. Australia has managed to largely contain its novel coronavirus epidemic, limited cases to nearly 29,000 and deaths to 909, with the sort of decisive action seen in Perth and tight border controls. A vaccine campaign is due to begin this month, with which Prime Minister Scott Morrison said it would cost at least 6.3 billion Australian dollars. Australia had already pledged to spend $4.4 billion to acquire enough doses for its 26 million population, but Morrison said his government had set aside a further $1.9 billion to pay for the rollout. The strategy is backed by an initial allocation of $1.9 billion in new support of the vaccine rollout. This is up on top of more than $4.4 billion allocated for the purchases themselves, Morrison said in a speech in Canberra. Classifying the inoculation program as his first priority, Morrison said the economy must now begin to wean itself off government spending. Australia has pledged more than 250 billion Australian dollars in stimulus, which has already begun to taper. But Morrison said there was a limit to the support the government could afford. We're not running a blank check budget, Morrison said. So finally the economics is catching up with those loonies in Australia. I've looked around to see how the public mood is on this piece of news. The New York Times, a former newspaper, is literally the only one lauding this madness. Nobody else, even Panicard Central, otherwise known as CNN, just placed it on the margin and said, I don't know, we're not convinced it's a good idea. I mean, even CNN, right? But through the voice of Damien Cave, who is a bureau chief in Sydney for the New York Times. He's not a stupid fellow, by the way, but unbelievably gullible to scientism. I'm going to leave you the link in the low bar. It's a disgusting piece of article, the way it's written, and say that basically, the Australians just shrug off and think it's a good idea. And I'm like, well, that's not what the internet says. I'm in several Australian groups on Facebook, incognito. And I was looking what their reaction is to this piece of news.
Everybody laughed their asses off. Send an entire city into a quarantine just because you found one case. No, not 10, not 1,000, just one.
Yeah, and the guy that allegedly has the virus. It's not even clear that he actually has it. He's not coughing. He doesn't have a fever. Doesn't have anything. So, it's not even clear that he's actually having the coup. But let's assume he does. Okay, so. That's the thing. The bottom of the country, let's put it this way, doesn't seem to be supporting this kind of madness either. And now the top of the country, Scott Morrison, be like, guys, we're not running a blank check budget. At some point, just have to flatten this madness anyway, because, there are no more money. Sure, Australia can print more, but how much more, right? I mean, there is a point when you can't print more, and the model that is lauded again only by the New York Times is going to go down in history not the way the adherents to the dogma of scientism think it does, because when they will have to compare themselves with economically 5 years from now, 6 years from now. With with anyone in Europe, really. Europe went kind of half measures. Yeah, they took in some wisdom from the CCP, but at the same time, they're like, let's not be insane, right? Whereas Australia went full insane. They made China look like a democratic society in comparison, right? Even some of their epidemiologists are now Australian epidemiologists, also quoted in the New York Times, a former newspaper. They're like, I'm not convinced, because focusing an entire society, even a small one numerically speaking, right? 26 million people is not a lot by global standards, but focusing an entire society, even a smaller one, around a single issue and just measuring everything by the number of cases, not even deaths, just cases, there's no way you can convince me that's a good idea.
We really need to borrow them the rationale from that was used to flatten the tests in Portugal, because they really need it right now. Closing down the entire city just because you found one case, and even that one is not exactly entirely sure. Yeah, that's insanity, and I maintain my point of view. Australia has to be a conspiracy theory, because this is way too insane for anybody who considers themselves a country, even if it's a penal colony. At least they like to pretend they're a country.
Yeah, but admittedly, this is not the first time, and this is probably most of the people watching don't know. Well, except for the Australians who are old enough, they probably do. But most of everyone else doesn't know. This is not the first time and it's happening in Australia. At the previous pandemic, there were 3 countries with excesses: Mexico, China, and Australia. China, the entire country of China went into lockdown due to the what was then the swine flu.
The swine flu,
right? Most of Mexico went into lockdown because it was technically the Mexican flu, because that's where it started. And Australia, which also had a lot of, they didn't go into lockdowns then, but they also had these kinds of sanitary fascism where the police would get into your house and remove the person that was coughing. This happened in 2010 and 2009 and a little bit in 2011 as well. Most of the planet, the pandemic was already over, but not in Australia. Because, that happens when you have some sort of a cough, whether it's a coronavirus or a flu. If you insist too much on this kind of extremist approach, you might end up being the only one that still has an epidemic when everyone else has moved further.
Yep.
So amazing. The same thing happened with the Australian Open, right? Same thing. Some security guard coughed a little bit, and they cancelled the entire day or 2 days in a row of the Australian Open. So in order to test like 1,000 people, and of course none of them had anything. And most of the foreign tennis players that had arrived there, almost all of them are on record having had the cough already. So why waste the time?
But you see, what if they bring the cough back to our land?
Jesus Christ. Because I've been following this because there are quite a few Romanian tennis players who are now at the Australian Open, and on the sports newspapers they write, maybe not daily, but 2 or 3 days apart, a news horror story said by the sportsmen and sportswomen attending the Australian Open, and they were like, this was a mistake, we should have stayed home. Because they're like, come on, this is gulag type of and most of the Eastern European tennis players are now at the Australian. They almost all have the same kind of stories. They're like, we're not coming back here. They're like, no. Well, with the exception of Simona Halep, because she has some roots in Australia. Her best friend and her trainer is Australian and whatever. But except her, and even her, she's like, these guys are going a bit too far with it. But except her, all of the other Eastern European tennis players be like, this was a mistake. Again, some security guard kilometers away coughed. Let's lock everyone down because Jesus Christ. There's no way you can convince me that this is not insane. I don't care how dangerous you think this cough is. This is insane. I forget the name of that journalist in the Soviet Union who denied the existence of the gulags for the New York Times in the 30s, and basically was writing articles for the New York Times praising Stalin, and he also got a Pulitzer Prize for it. That's how I look at Damien Cave now. All right, he's in a penal colony that puts 2 million people under house arrest overnight because potato, and he's like, oh well, it's not a big deal, and it's actually healthy, and it's a what? No, like no, because no.
Well, even then, giving importance to the Pravda on the Hudson at any point, you should really reconsider exactly what you're reading. We're reading it because because it's a pretty solid source for kicks, but everybody else who takes them seriously, yeah, the problem is definitely with you.
Yeah, that's true, but at the same time, we still have admittedly smaller share of the influencers, elite speakers, whatever, but still a significant portion of those people still take the Pravda on Hudson seriously, which is why I still spend time mocking it and contradicting it openly, because I want to get use as many people as possible, especially journalists, non-American journalists, to simply assume that everything they read in the New York Times is wrong, and stop quoting unironically in the New York Times. The Babylon Bee is okay to quote the New York Times. Everyone else shouldn't, right? Unless you want to mock them, but even then you should abstain. It's kind of like Russia Today. You don't quote RT, right? You don't quote the New York Times. You just don't. I don't care how exclusive their information is, how sweet it is. You just don't. Unless you want to mock it. And only as part of a propaganda show where you're openly marking, okay, this is propaganda studies time, and then we read the New York Times. Right? Kind of like in propaganda studies in the 80s, one would be reading Pravda.
Yeah, the Pravda.
The other Pravda, right?
The real Pravda.
The real Pravda. Pravda on Don, right? Alrighty, I think this one is the final one. Radio NZ, mining industry mostly disagrees with Climate Change Commission report. Stratera, the industry body representing the country's mineral companies, said the report highlighted the many challenges people would encounter in the name of reducing carbon emissions. But it said there was a lot in the report that it did not agree with. The report optimistically talks about reporting coal with biomass and electricity, but the challenges associated with this are substantial. For example, the area of land required for biomass cultivation would run into the millions of hectares, Stratera Chief Executive Chris Baker said. He said the cost of electricity for businesses transitioning away from coal had to be attractive, and there was no guarantee that this would be the case in the future. The key point to be made is that the government's emission reduction policies must not reduce the international competitiveness of the tradable sector, as this will simply shift production and emissions offshore with no benefits to New Zealand nor the global climate. However, there were parts of the report that the sector did support. Baker said the sector was pleased the Commission had acknowledged the role minerals would play in the development of green technology, such as electric batteries, and that it was not advocating for total renewable electricity generation. There seemed to be a growing recognition that this target would be counterproductive to reducing emissions overall. Meanwhile, the ASB Bank is among those businesses welcoming the report. It said banks would play an important role in supporting the changes called for in the Commission's draft advice, which is why it would access the Reserve Bank's funding for lending program to offer discounted credit to customers who are reducing their emissions. Our initial focus for discounted lending will be to help business customers embrace the change needed to move New Zealand to a lower emissions, more resilient future, ASB Chief Executive Victoria Short said. We'll help our business customers explore options such as moving their fleet to electric vehicles, switching to renewable energy for process heat, or more energy efficient commercial buildings. We'll also target projects that support both regional growth and positive climate outcomes. The bank also hinted that it may roll out discounted lending to help households slash their emissions and incentivize the construction of new energy efficient homes.
Oh, so you wanna, so the state wants to bankroll the renewables because obviously the renewables weren't economically feasible to start with.
Yeah, and
it's like they learned nothing from Germany's example.
Yeah, and the banks are very, very happy. Why? Because they will be able to do lending at discount rates, and everything else is covered by the state. I wonder if there is an economic theory that can predict the end of such a scheme if it is adopted on a nation, even a small one like New Zealand. Fannie and May, does that say?
Fannie Mae, yeah. Yeah,
does that tell you anything? Yeah, well, think that Fannie Mae, but with green energy rather than affordable housing. Right, and the same thing. Say they want to cover households and all of that. So it's basically the same kind of bubble. At this pace, it will burst, what, 2032, 2033, something like that, right? Because it's usually about 10 years. So, now it's the proposal, so probably 2 years from now, the first loans will be signed off for sure. So about 2032, 2033, this is gonna be fun.
But at least this article is important because it's one of the very few moments that you see in the media people from the industry actually talking about how bullshit all these limitations are. So, which is what I personally haven't heard any news outlet in Europe talking about what actually emission reduction is doing. It's outsourcing pretty much emissions anywhere else. For example, China, where emissions regulations are relevant only probably for 2 weeks out of the year when there's some, or not exactly like that. It's probably a month every 4 years. Whenever somebody cute is coming to visit the country. But at any point
they are observed for 2 weeks a year, which will be next. Oh no, actually this month during the Chinese New Year, when there's not much production going on, and as a result, there's probably lower emissions.
It's the only time you're gonna see actually a clear sky in Beijing.
right, and not just Beijing, Shanghai as well, Shenzhen as well, all of the big cities, right? Well, I think it was Deutsche Welle. I'm thinking it was strictly on mainstream sources. The alternative media has been talking about this quite a lot, but in mainstream sources, the controlled media or the cathedral media, I think Deutsche Welle was the only one who actually raised an eyebrow with the similar report from the I think it was some bullshit commission from the European Parliament. No, it wasn't about the European Parliament. It was in the Bundestag.
The Bundestag,
right, where they said that basically you need a green dictatorship or something like that. They basically used the term dictatorship, and even Deutsche Welle be like, are we sure? I mean, really, a report talking about the necessity of a dictatorship coming from the Bundestag. The Bundestag meets in a building called Reichstag. Maybe it's not a good idea.
Well, considering that today it isn't exactly a de facto fourth Reich, because Germany is pretty much dictating. It's pretty much dictating what happens in Europe by proxy of the Europeiский союз.
The Euro-Soyuz. But the thing is that this whole thing with the more green stuff, it wouldn't be a problem. Seriously, it wouldn't be a problem if there would have been more serious market desire for it, or if the technology would have been there for it, or at the very least very close to it, and the state would come in and say, okay, we're going to fund the last mile, just get it to the market faster. That wouldn't be it would be a problem in principle. Of course, any state intervention tends to be fucking terrible and turns out to be more expensive than if market forces would have been left alone, sure, but it wouldn't have been a major problem for everyone else necessarily, or it would have been a marginal one. But this is simply not the case. It's simply not the case. And yeah, sure, small countries, New Zealand I think is already too big territorially for this, but I'm thinking, places like the Netherlands, right? A very small and crowded place, yeah, I guess that one could be pretty green. They have those huge dams, there's a lot of wind in the offshore, okay, fair enough. Portions of Denmark, same thing, okay, fair enough. But powerhouses like Germany or sparsely populated places like Russia, not to mention crowded places like and poor places like poorer by Western standards, right? India, China. I'm not sure you can do that. Not to mention then the fact that many of them have illiberal regimes, like again Germany and China and Russia.
What do you mean Germany is an illiberal regime? They're a consolidated democracy.
Right. Well, if you really want to call Germany a democracy, then let's call it managed democracy, or as American politologists call it, inverted totalitarianism. I'm serious, that's an academic term, inverted totalitarianism, look it up. But yeah, if you really want to call Germany a democracy, fine, a managed democracy. But seriously, I mean, this whole thing is not there yet. The technological development is not there yet. And the push coming from the state is not helping, actually. That's the problem. It's not helping because it's not making things happen faster. It makes things happen equally slow as they would have happened without the state, but more expensive.
More expensive.
Right. And
yeah, it's as if this is what not exactly bothers me, but it just causes disappointment that that there are so many other examples of countries that have tried this, big or small, regardless, that they have tried this scheme of going green, and it always ended up disastrous. It happened in the case of Spain when they saw the consumer electricity triple to the point that that electricity will cost nearly as much as rent. Then the negating case in Germany where they had to revert back because they generated green electricity exactly when they didn't need it, and obviously there's no way to store it, so you either sell it or it's wasted.
It's wasted, and a lot of it ended up wasted because if you're Germany, who are going to export energy to? Right? Poland is full of coal-based power plants, and they don't really need to import from Germany. And of course, nobody in Poland would want to be reliant on Germany on something as strategic and as important as energy. France is full of either hydro or nuclear. Okay, France is pretty green.
Yeah.
Hydro and nuclear. That's pretty green.
But nuclear isn't green, man. Don't you understand?
Yeah, that's the problem. When you combine this technological push with eco-Marxism, that's when you get full retardation. I mean, yeah, sure. Everyone wants clean environment. It's not necessarily that there are very few people who are ostensibly against clean environment. But there is a problem of how to get there, and the idea of getting there through these kinds of discounted lending and
Yeah, it's either the discounted lending or making electric cars, which newsflash, even after so many years when the technology got developed, they're still fucking expensive. Yeah. As an example, a really local one, but it's also applicable everywhere else. Where especially you're incentivized to buy a green car. I was hearing without wishing to this advertising from a Mercedes dealership here that if you take your garbage car in order to get that green ticket that allows you to buy a new car at discount because it's energy pollutant or it's very old. You can go to the dealership along with the 10,000 euros that you get from the state in order to buy one of the new electric Mercedes, which
is 100k.
It's not exactly. It's not 100k, but I've done the calculation. So the retail price for that car is 48,000 euros. So you
$60,000.
So you discount the maximum money that you can get from that eco ticket and the incentive. You still have to pay 30,000 euros, which is a lot of money for a car that's also electric. And who exactly has the infrastructure of recharging that car?
Yeah, because that's another aspect. It requires the kind of infrastructure that takes decades to build. Now, okay, fine. You print cheap money and you give a discounted lending and whatever, you can speed that up a little bit, but instead of taking decades, it still takes 10 years. That's still 10 years. Okay, 8 still. That's still a lot of time. Meanwhile, you can't really take a longer trip by car because you run out of battery in the middle of fucking nowhere, and gas stations are everywhere, but that kind of charging infrastructure is not. Not to mention that, again, I keep on reminding people this, and I always get a lot of hate for it. There hasn't been a breakthrough in battery technology for 50 years. It's still not there. The way batteries are made today is the same as they were 50 years ago. There's nothing, no serious innovation has been forthcoming, and has been happening, and none is forthcoming. That's what I'm saying. So that means that you'll still be reliant on very rare minerals, most of them in China or in Africa, extracted via slave labor, mostly owned by China. There's that. So you can be clean. No, you're not going to be clean. Not to mention that I think there was this calculation that an electric car over its lifespan ends up being more damaging
to the environment, taking into consideration the mining methods employed in order to get the nickel and everything to make those those batteries. Yeah, but this eco-Marxism was never about saving the environment. It was about making people feel like they were saving the environment, which is why you have all these people. Yeah, sorry to say, but Tesla rode that wave, and I actually applaud Elon Musk for exploiting these imbeciles.
Oh yeah, sure.
That he sold pretty much cars that cost $100,000 because they were electric. And it made a lot of people feel like they were saving the environment because my car is electric and you're not using gas.
Yeah, well, how do you say, the fool and his money are soon to be parted.
Yeah, they have to be parted by as soon as possible, preferably by you.
Yes, so no, I'm not blaming Musk here. I'm blaming the Musk cultists, right? So the people who bought into the bullshit. Those are at fault. Musk isn't at fault because he just asked for a bajillion shekels for a car that is totally not worth that amount. And like with any other product in human history, you ask for the price that the market is willing to offer. And the market, being the stupid dupes, well, they were willing to offer a fortune, essentially, on a product that is definitely not comparable with what you can get non-electric, right? For the same money. I mean,
not even electric, but even a hybrid alternative. Because
not to mention the hybrid.
Yeah, because hybrids were very solid. I remember I used in 2010. It was one of the first years that the Chevrolet Volt appeared, and that car with a dinky 1.4 liter engine and the battery that could take you 60 miles.
Not bad.
You could get with a petrol tank an autonomy of nearly 1,100 kilometers.
Not bad. Not bad.
And it wasn't it was an expensive car. Yeah, it was slightly more expensive in the region where it was because it was kind of competing with the Toyota Prius, but even that one was the very first. But even then, that is still more viable than go full electric.
Yeah, at least with the hybrids, that sounds to me like the market efficient and technologically efficient, and also more in line with the idea of reducing pollution, because at least you're charging it locally with petrol and you get more autonomy and you also reduce pollution. With the same amount of pollution, you go more kilometers, which should, with the law of big numbers, reduce some of the pollution related to individual transport, right?
Yeah.
But then again, that would be sensible, and eco-Marxism is not about being sensible.
Yeah, exactly.
And besides, it's too cheap. In Marxism, everything has to be expensive. I'm serious. In 1989, you could buy an apartment with 2 video cassette players. Right, whereas in 1990, just 1 year, several months really after the fall of the regime, you would need 5,000 video cassette players to buy an apartment, because that's what capitalism does. It makes things cheap and affordable. Whereas with Marxism, of course, they have to be expensive because the regime needs your shekels.
Yeah, but even then, the eco-Marxism is also has a very significant share of technooptimism, which is why they want to try to do this jump straight from petrol to electric and now consider the alternative in the middle, which isn't a bad alternative, because if it was bad, I would totally understand it, but it's by no means bad, and it's been tested. Hybrids already exist commercially for 15, 16 years already,
something like that,
and the numbers keep on growing.
Yeah.
Shockingly.
Yeah, I mean, even in admittedly only in not very rich, but richer portions of Africa. But even in countries you wouldn't expect, that are basically middle income or even low income countries, you can see from time to time a hybrid going up by. I mean, even they're renouncing their very old cars and very polluting cars and replacing them with something newish. Now, admittedly, they use hybrids from 2008. But it's still better than using old Indian cars from the 70s. I'm just saying, because that's usually that was the case 20 years ago in Africa. You would see no car made in, well, not even 10 years ago. In 2010, 2011, there was almost no place in Africa where you would see a car made in the 21st century. Right? Like ever.
You will see something like 1960s Nissans. Well, they weren't even considered Nissans back then. They were Datsuns.
Datsun, yes.
Yeah, or really old Toyotas from the 60s, or rarely those people who really had money would get something like a 1970s Land Rover.
Yeah, well, almost all of that is gone now. I mean, there are much newer cars on the streets of African countries, even poorer ones. So 19. But yeah, well, the great sneeze forward. That's basically what, yeah, it is the great sneeze forward.
Yeah,
I mean,
it could be also allergic to this bullshit.
But yeah, seriously, the whole idea of okay, fine, you want a more clean environment and you don't give a shit how many industries get borked in the process. But the problem is that you're not just borking industries, you're borking your own lifestyle and your own progress as a society. I mean, that's the thing.
Yeah, but how much they care about lifestyle when they're the sort of people that think that just because they're Uber Eats or Food Panda or Deliveroo brings their food at the door, that's how food is made. They don't care. They don't even know that a cow has to be slaughtered in order to get the beef, or a crop has to be gathered in order to get the grain and to have the very expensive bread bun, and even the avocado has to be grown, gathered, and shipped by plane.
Sure, but here's another aspect. We laughed quite a bit about meme stocks earlier in this episode, but Uber Eats and Glovo, and they're basically meme stocks as well. None of these companies is profitable. Not even Uber itself. Uber itself is unprofitable as well. None of these people are making money. They're basically wasting the investors' money. There are meme stocks. They are meme stocks, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, fundamentally flawed business models.
Yes, and at some point there will be something called the market correction. And the whole situation with the pandemic age probably delayed the inevitable a little bit by a year, maybe by two. But at the end of the day, the receipt is coming. The check is coming, and the party will be over. It has to be over because the investors don't have unlimited amount of money. At some point, investors be like, "Where are my profits at?" Okay, and not to mention that, because I was discussing this with a restaurant owner who basically ignores all of the COVID-19 restrictions, and and I was having a dinner with him. And I asked him, have you been using any of these hipster methods of delivery and whatnot? And he was like, yes, for a week. And I'm like, why? Well, because they have their own fees, and basically they're not really making money. I'm not making enough money, and it's basically cheaper for me to dump them all and maybe keep the restaurant closed for a week or two. It's cheaper and less problematic for my business than to use them. And then to serve the hipsters, basically, who order through them. And not to mention for the consumer is also terrible, because you get a lower experience than going physically to the restaurant, and you get more expensive a more expensive check for the same type of consumption than you would have gotten from the restaurant, and all of the money is pocketed to cover the losses of businesses, whatever, institutions, conglomerates like Food Panda or whatever, because they're not a business really. They're a money shredding machine. That's really what they are. And the same thing will be true with most of these green stuff. Now, sure, that doesn't mean the technology itself is useless. No, there may be applications for it. Hybrid cars, solar panels are very good in outer space, very good.
Yeah, or in countries where you get a lot of sun, for example.
Morocco?
Morocco, Middle East, Sahara area.
Yeah, sure. Or for smaller things, like I think I've seen where was it? Where it was more widespread. I think in Sweden, but like Malmö, for instance, is very, very green in the sense that some of the public lighting is partially on solar panels. But yeah, okay, there's a lot of sun, especially during between March and October in Malmö. And the day is very long, and it's very hot. I know, because I've been last summer there. It's very hot. Oftentimes it's warmer than Southern Europe. And in that respect, okay, it works. But even they, as green as they are in Malmö, even they don't rely on them. It's like, okay, if it works 3 months a year, fair enough. At least we're not paying a city's electricity bill for the 3 months. That's good enough. But again, for smaller things, yes. Whereas I've seen in the Middle East, I think it was in Jordan, where those who run stores in the middle of nowhere in the desert, they charge their POS with a solar battery. Okay, fair enough. There's definitely a better alternative than the driving 50 kilometers closer to the closest village or city or town or whatever. So there are applications for these kinds of technologies, but one has to understand that they're niche, at least for now. And until there is a major breakthrough in the battery technology, which may take another 20 years from now, okay, it may happen tomorrow. Sometimes decades happen in a week, sure. But usually that's not the case. With technology, it's
generally incremental progress.
Yeah.
In very rare cases, the sudden breakthrough.
So that's techno-optimism, leftism, eco-Marxism, as I was saying. These are the enemies, and they are the enemies of your freedom, because some of these people are so determined that they don't even consider not just how they're making most people poorer, but how they're stepping on liberties that even they themselves cherish. And if they get to implement even portions of their agenda, then the same people will then ask, what happened to that particular aspect of liberty that I was enjoying? And only then, sometimes, some of them realize that, it's your fault. But many of them don't. Like Solzhenitsyn explains in our Gulag Archipelago, some of them realize that the Gulag is real only when the boot is on their neck, inside of Krasnoyarsk or whatever, or the Arkhangelsk labor community. That's what it's called. Labor colony, right? Sorry. All right. That will be pretty much it for now. Gib shekels.
We told you other stories.
We told you several stories. Gib shekels. I'll be publishing a bit more of some of the with me alone. And join our Discord server. Visit our website. Join the Telegram group. That's a lot of action there. I will kick you out if you come to concern troll me. But other than that, I don't give a shit what you say. And see you, I guess, in 2 weeks, unless there's a problem because I'm starting a national tour soon enough. And but I think there will be enough time to make another World So Far report. Maybe tape it a little bit earlier, maybe on Monday instead of Thursday. We'll see. We'll find a way to do another episode this month for sure in this format. So with that said, thanks for watching. Cheers.